Chapter 1. The Wide and Barren North. The Magi are an ancient and mysterious order, learned in the secrets of the world, practiced in the ways of magic, wise and powerful, beyond the dreams of men. That was the rumor. Such a one should have ways of finding a man, even a man alone in the wide and barren north. If that was so, then he was taking his time about it. Logen scratched at his tangled beard and wondered what was keeping the Great One. Perhaps he was lost. He asked himself again if he should have stayed in the forests, where food at least was plentiful. But to the south, the spirits had said, and if you went south from the hills, you came to these withered moors. So here he had waited in the briars and the mud, in bad weather, and mostly gone hungry. His boots were worn out anyway, so he had set his miserable camp not far from the road, the better to see this wizard coming. Since the wars, the north was full of dangerous, scum-deserting warriors turned bandit. Peasants fled from their burned-out land, leaderless and desperate men with nothing left to lose, and so on. Logen wasn't worried, though. No one had a reason to come to this arsehole of the world. No one but him and the Magus. So he sat and waited, looked for food, didn't find any. Sat and waited some more. At this time of year the moors were often soaked by sudden downpours, but he would have smoky, thorny little fires by night if he could, to keep his flagging spirits up and attract any passing wizards. It had been raining this evening, but it had stopped a while before, and it was dry enough for a fire. Now he had his pot over it, cooking a stew with the last of the meat he had brought with him from the forest. He would have to move on in the morning, and look for food. The Magus could catch up with him later if he still cared. He was stirring his meager meal, and wondering whether to go back north or move on south tomorrow, when he heard the sound of hooves on the road. One horse, moving slowly. He sat back on his coat and waited. There was a neigh, the jingle of a harness. A rider came over the rise. With the watery sun low on the horizon behind, Logen couldn't see him clearly, but he sat stiff and awkward in his saddle, like a man not used to the road. He urged his horse gently in the direction of the fire and reined in a few yards away. "Good evening," he said. He was not in the least what Logen had been expecting. A gaunt, pale, sickly-looking young man with dark rings round his eyes, long hair plastered to his head by the drizzle, and a nervous smile. He seemed more wet than wise, and certainly didn't look powerful beyond the dreams of men. He looked mostly hungry, cold, and ill. He looked something like Logen felt, in fact. "Shouldn't you have a staff?" The young man looked surprised. "I don't, that is to say, am not a magus." He trailed off and licked his lips nervously. "Well, the spirits told me to expect a magus, but they're often wrong. Oh, well, I'm an apprentice, but my master, the great Bayaz," and he bowed his head reverently, "is none other than the first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep wisdom. He sent me to find you," he looked suddenly doubtful, "and bring you. You are Logen Ninefingers." Logen held up his left hand and looked at the pale young man through the gap where his middle finger used to be. "Oh, good." The apprentice breathed a sigh of relief, then suddenly stopped himself. "Oh, that is to say, sorry about the finger." Logen laughed. It was the first time since he dragged himself out of the river. It wasn't very funny, but he laughed loud. It felt good. The young man smiled and slipped painfully from the saddle. "I am Malachus Quai." "Malachus what?" "Kai," he said, making for the fire. "What kind of a name is that?" "I am from the old empire." Logen had never heard of any such place. An empire, eh? Well, it was, once, the mightiest nation in the circle of the world. The young man squatted down stiffly by the fire. But the glory of the past is long faded. It's not much more than a huge battlefield now. Logen nodded. He knew well enough what one of those looked like. It's far away, in the west of the world. The apprentice waved his hand vaguely. Logen laughed again. That ceased. Quay smiled sadly. "I am a seer, though not, it seems, a very good one. Master Baez sent me to find you. But the stars have not been auspicious, and I became lost in the bad weather." He pushed his hair out of his eyes and spread his hands. "I had a pack horse with food and supplies, and another horse for you, but I lost them in a storm. I fear I am no outdoorsman. Seems not. Quay took a flask from his pocket and leaned across with it. Logen took it from him, opened it, took a swig. The hot liquor ran down his throat, warmed him to the roots of his hair. Well, Malachus Quay, you lost your food, but you kept hold of what really mattered. It takes an effort to make me smile these days. You're right welcome at my fire. Thank you. The apprentice paused and held his palms out to the meager flames. I haven't eaten for 2 days. He shook his head, hair flapping back and forth. It has been a difficult time. He licked his lips and looked at the pot. Logen passed him the spoon. Malachus Quay stared at it with big round eyes. Have you eaten? Logen nodded. He hadn't. But the wretched apprentice looked famished, and there was barely enough for one. He took another swig from the flask. That would do for him. For now. Quay attacked the stew with relish. When it was done, he scraped the pot out, licked the spoon, then licked the edge of the pot for good measure. He sat back against a big rock. I am forever in your debt. Logen Ninefingers, you've saved my life. I hardly dared hope you'd be so gracious a host. You're not quite what I expected either, being honest. Logen pulled at the flask again, and licked his lips. Who is this Bayaz? The first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep wisdom. I fear he will be most seriously displeased with me. He's to be feared, then. Well, replied the apprentice weakly. He does have a bit of a temper. Logen took another swallow. The warmth was spreading through his body now, the first time he had felt warm in weeks. There was a pause. What does he want from me, Quay? There was no reply. The soft sound of snoring came from across the fire. Logen smiled, and wrapping himself in his coat, lay down to sleep as well. The apprentice woke with a sudden fit of coughing. It was early morning, and the dingy world was thick with mist. It was probably better that way. There was nothing to see but miles of mud, rock, and miserable brown gorse. Everything was coated in cold dew, but Logen had managed to get a sad tongue of fire going. Quay's hair was plastered to his pallid face. He rolled onto his side and coughed phlegm onto the ground. Ah, he croaked, he coughed and spat again. Logen secured the last of his meager gear on the unhappy horse. Morning, he said, looking up at the white sky, though not a good one. I will die, and then I will not have to move. We've got no food, so if we stay here you will die. Then I can't eat you and go back over the mountains. The apprentice smiled weakly. What do we do? What do we find this Bayaz? At the Great Northern Library. Logen had never heard of it, but then he'd never been that interested in books. Which is where? It's south of here, about 4 days' ride beside a great lake. Do you know the way? The apprentice tottered to his feet and stood, swaying slightly, breathing fast and shallow. He was ghostly pale and his face had a sheen of sweat. I think so, he muttered, but he hardly looked certain. Neither Quay nor his horse would make 4 days without food, even providing they didn't get lost. Food had to be the first thing. To follow the road through the woods to the south was the best option. Despite the greater risk, they might get killed by bandits, but the forage would be better, and the hunger would likely kill them otherwise. You'd better ride, said Logen. I lost the horses, I should be the one to walk. Logen put his hand on Quay's forehead. It was hot and clammy. You've a fever, you'd better ride. The apprentice didn't try to argue. He looked down at Logen's ragged boots. Can you take my boots? Logen shook his head. Too small. He knelt down over the smoldering remains of the fire and pursed his lips. What are you doing? Fires have spirits. I will keep this one under my tongue, and we can use it to light another fire later. Quay looked too ill to be surprised. Logen sucked up the spirit, coughed on the smoke, shuddered at the bitter taste. You ready to leave? The apprentice raised his arms in a hopeless gesture. I am packed. Malachus Quay loved to talk. He talked as they made their way south across the moors, as the sun climbed into the grimy skies, as they entered the woods toward evening time. His illness did nothing to stop his chatter, but Logen didn't mind. It was a long time since anyone had talked to him, and it helped to take his mind off his feet. He was starving and tired, but it was his feet that were the problem. His boots were tatters of old leather, his toes cut and battered. His calf was still burning from the Shanka's teeth. Every step was an ordeal. Once they had called him the most feared man in the north. Now he was afraid of the smallest sticks and stones in the road. There was a joke in there somewhere. He winced as his foot hit a pebble. So I spent 7 years studying with Master Zacharias. He is great among the Magi, the 5th of Juven's 12 apprentices, a great man. Everything connected with the Magi seemed to be great in Kwai's eyes. He felt I was ready to come to the Great Northern Library and study with Master Baez to earn my staff. But things have not been easy for me here. Master Baez is most demanding, and the horse stopped and snorted, shied and took a hesitant step back. Logen sniffed the air and frowned. There were men nearby and badly washed ones. He should have noticed it sooner, but his attention had been on his feet. Kwai looked down at him. "What is it?" As if in answer, a man stepped out from behind a tree, perhaps 10 strides ahead, another a little further down the road. They were scum, without a doubt, dirty, bearded, dressed in ragged bits of mismatched fur and leather. Not on the whole, unlike Logen. The skinny one on the left had a spear with a barbed head. The big one on the right had a heavy sword speckled with rust, and an old dented helmet with a spike on top. They moved forward, grinning. There was a sound behind, and Logen looked over his shoulder, his heart sinking. A third man, with a big boil on his face, was making his way cautiously down the road toward them, a heavy wood axe in his hands. Kwai leaned down from his saddle, eyes wide with fear. "Are they bandits?" "You're the fucking seer," hissed Logen through gritted teeth. They stopped a stride or two in front. The one with the helmet seemed to be in charge. "Nice horse," he growled. "Would you lend it to us?" The one with the spear grinned as he took hold of the bridle. Things had taken a turn for the worse, all right. A moment ago that had hardly seemed possible, but fate had found a way. Logen doubted that Kwai would be much use in a fight. That left him alone against 3 or more, and with only a knife. If he did nothing, him and Malachus would end up robbed, and more than likely killed. You have to be realistic about these things. He looked the 3 bandits over again. They didn't expect a fight, not from 2 unarmed men. The spear was sideways on. The sword pointed at the ground. He didn't know about the axe, so he'd have to trust to luck with that one. It's a sorry fact that the man who strikes first usually strikes last, so Logen turned to the one with the helmet and spat the spirit in his face. It ignited in the air and pounced on him hungrily. His head burst into spitting flames. The sword clattered to the ground. He clawed desperately at his face, and his arms caught fire as well. He reeled, screaming away. Kwai's horse startled at the flames and reared up, snorting. The skinny man stumbled back with a gasp, and Logen leaped at him, grabbed the shaft of the spear with one hand and butted him in the face. His nose crunched against Logen's forehead, and he staggered away with blood streaming down his chin. Logen jerked him back with the spear, swung his right arm round in a wide arc, and punched him in the neck. He went down with a gurgle, and Logen tore the spear from his hands. He felt movement behind him and dropped to the ground, rolling away to his left. The axe whistled through the air above his head and cut a long slash in the horse's side, spattering drops of blood across the ground and ripping the buckle on the saddle girth open. Boilface tottered away, spinning around after his axe. Logen sprang at him, but his ankle twisted on a stone, and he tottered like a drunkard, yelping at the pain. An arrow hummed past his face from somewhere in the trees behind, and was lost in the bushes on the other side of the road. The horse snorted and kicked, eyes rolling madly, then took off down the road at a crazy gallop. Malachus Kwai wailed as the saddle slid off its back, and he was flung into the bushes. There was no time to think about him. Logen charged at the axeman with a roar, aiming the spear at his heart. He brought his axe up in time to nudge the point away, but not far enough. The spear spitted him through the shoulder, spun him round. There was a sharp crack as the shaft snapped. Logen lost his balance and pitched forward, bearing Boilface down into the road. Logen seized hold of the axeman's matted hair with both hands, pulled his head back, and mashed his face into a rock. He lurched to his feet, head spinning, wiping blood out of his eyes just in time to see an arrow zip out of the trees and thud into a trunk a stride or 2 away. Logen hurtled at the archer. He saw him now, a boy no more than 14, reaching for another arrow. Logen pulled out his knife. The boy was knocking the arrow to his bow, but his eyes were wide with panic. He fumbled the string and drove the arrow through his hand, looking greatly surprised. Logen was on him. The boy swung the bow at him, but he ducked below it and jumped forward, driving the knife up with both hands. The blade caught the boy under the chin and lifted him into the air, then snapped off in his neck. He dropped on top of Logen, the jagged shard of the knife cutting a long gash in his arm. Blood splattered everywhere, from the cut on Logen's head, from the cut on Logen's arm, from the gaping wound in the boy's throat. He shoved the corpse away, staggered against a tree, and gasped for breath. His heart was pounding, the blood roaring in his ears, his stomach turning over. "I'm still alive," he whispered. "I'm still alive." The cuts on his head and his arm were starting to throb. 2 more scars. It could have been a lot worse. He scraped the blood from his eyes and limped back to the road. Malachus Quay was standing, staring ashen-faced at the 3 corpses. Logen took him by the shoulders, looked him up and down. "You hurt?" Quay only stared at the bodies. "Are they dead?" The corpse of the big one with the helmet was still smoking, making a disgustingly appetizing smell. He had a good pair of boots on, Logen noticed, a lot better than his own. The one with the boil had his neck turned too far around to be alive. That, and he had the broken spear through him. Logen rolled the skinny one over with his foot. He still had a look of surprise on his bloody face, eyes staring up at the sky, mouth open. "You've crushed his windpipe," muttered Logen. His hands were covered in blood. He grabbed one with the other to stop them from trembling. "What about the one in the trees?" Logen nodded. "What happened to the horse?" "Gone," muttered Quay hopelessly. "What do? We see if they've got any food." Logen pointed to the smoking corpse. "And you help me get his boots off." Chapter 2. Fencing Practice. "Press him, Jezal. Press him. Don't be shy." Jezal was only too willing to oblige. He sprang forward, lunging with his right. West was already off balance and he stumbled back, all out of form, only just managing to parry with his short steel. They were using half-edged blades today to add a little danger to the proceedings. You couldn't really stab a man with one, but you could give him a painful scratch or two. If you tried hard enough. Jezal intended to give the major a scratch for yesterday's humiliation. "That's it, give him hell. Jab, 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 jab." West made a clumsy cut, but Jezal saw it coming and swatted the steel aside, still pressing forward, jabbing for all he was worth. He slashed with the left, and again. West blocked desperately, staggered back against the wall. Jezal had him at last. He cackled with glee as he lunged forward again with a long steel, but his opponent had come suddenly and surprisingly alive. West slipped away, shoved the lunge aside with disappointing firmness. Jezal stumbled forward, off balance, gave a shocked gasp as the point of his sword found a gap between 2 stones and his steel was wrenched out of his numb hand, lodged there wobbling in the wall. West darted forward, ducked inside Jezal's remaining blade and slammed into him with his shoulder. "Oof," said Jezal as he staggered back and crashed to the floor, fumbling his short steel. It skittered across the stones and Lord Marshal Varus caught it smartly under his foot. The blunted point of West's sword hovered over Jezal's throat. "Damn it," he cursed as the grinning major offered him his hand. "Yes," murmured Varus with a deep sigh. "Damn it indeed. An even more detestable performance than yesterday's, if that's possible. You let Major West make a fool of you again." Jezal slapped West's hand away with a scowl and got to his feet. He never once lost control of that bout. "You allowed yourself to be drawn in, and then disarmed. Disarmed. My grandson would not have made that mistake, and he is 8 years old." Varus whacked at the floor with his stick. "Explain to me, please, Captain Luthar, how you will win a fencing match from a prone position, and without your steels." Jezal sulked and rubbed the back of his head. "No, in future, if you fall off a cliff carrying your steels, I want to see you smashed to bits at the bottom, gripping them tightly in your dead fingers. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Marshal Varus," mumbled a sullen Jezal, wishing the old bastard would take a tumble off a cliff himself. Or perhaps the Tower of Chains. That would be adequate. Maybe Major West could join him. Overconfidence is a curse to the swordsman. You must treat every opponent as though he will be your last. As for your footwork, and Varus curled his lip with disgust, fine and fancy coming forward, but put you on the back foot, and you quite wither away. The major only had to tap you, and you fell down like a fainting schoolgirl." West grinned across at him. He was loving this. Absolutely loving it, damn him. They say Bremer Dan Gorst has a back leg like a pillar of steel. A pillar of steel, they say. It would be easier to knock down the house of the Maker than him. The Lord Marshal pointed over at the outline of the huge tower, looming up over the buildings of the courtyard. "The house of the Maker," he shouted in disgust. Jezal sniffed and kicked at the floor with his boot. For the 100th time he entertained the notion of giving it up and never holding a steel again. But what would people say? His father was absurdly proud of him, always boasting about his skill to anyone who would listen. He had his heart set on seeing his son fight in the square of marshals before a screaming crowd. If Jezal threw it over now, his father would be mortified, and he could say goodbye to his commission, goodbye to his allowance, goodbye to his ambitions. No doubt his brothers would love that. "Balance is the key," Varus was spouting. "Your strength rises up through the legs. From now on we will add an hour on the beam to your training. Every day." Jezal winced. "So. A run, exercises with the heavy bar, forms, an hour of sparring, forms again, an hour on the beam." The Lord Marshal nodded with satisfaction. "That will suffice. For now, I will see you at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Ice cold sober." Varus frowned. "Ice cold sober. I can't do this forever, you know," said Jezal as he hobbled stiffly back towards his quarters. "How much of this horrible shit should a man have to take?" West grinned. "This is nothing. I've never seen the old bastard so soft on anyone. He must really like you. He wasn't half so friendly with me." Jezal wasn't sure he believed it. "Worse than this, I didn't have the grounding that you've had. He made me hold the heavy bar over my head all afternoon, until it fell on me." The major winced slightly, as though even the memory was painful. "He made me run up and down the tower of chains in full armor. He had me sparring 4 hours a day, every day. How did you put up with it?" "I didn't have a choice. I'm not a nobleman. Fencing was the only way for me to get noticed, but it paid off in the end." "How many commoners do you know with a commission in the king's own?" Jezal shrugged. "Come to think of it, very few, as a nobleman himself. He didn't think there should be any. But you're from a good family, and a captain already. If you can win the contest, there's no telling how far you could go. Hoff the Lord Chamberlain, Morovia the High Justice, Virus himself for that matter, they were all champions in their day. Champions with the right blood always go on to great things." Jezal snorted. "Like your friend Sandan Glokta?" The name dropped between them like a stone. "Well, almost always. Major West," came a rough voice from behind. A thick-set sergeant with a scar down his cheek was hurrying over to them. "Sergeant Forrest, how are you?" asked West, clapping the soldier warmly on the back. He had a touch with peasants, but then Jezal had to keep reminding himself that West was little better than a peasant himself. He might be educated, and an officer, and so forth, but he still had more in common with the sergeant than he did with Jezal, once you thought about it. The sergeant beamed. "Very well. Thank you, sir." He nodded respectfully to Jezal. "Morning, Captain." Jezal favored him with a terse nod and turned away to look up the avenue. He could think of no possible reason why an officer would want to be familiar with the common soldiers. Furthermore, he was scarred and ugly. Jezal had no use whatever for ugly people. "What can I do for you?" West was asking. "Marshal Burr wishes to see you, sir, for an urgent briefing. All senior officers are ordered to attend." West's face clouded. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The sergeant saluted and strode off. "What's all that about?" asked Jezal carelessly, watching some clerk chase around and after a paper he had dropped. "England, this king of the Northmen, Bethod." West said the name with a scowl, as though it left a bitter taste. "They say he's defeated all his enemies in the north, and now he's spoiling for a fight with the Union." "Well, if it's a fight he wants," said Jezal airily. Wars were a fine thing in his opinion, an excellent opportunity for glory and advancement. The paper fluttered past his boot on the light breeze, closely followed by the puffing clerk. Jezal grinned at him as he hurried past, bent almost double in his clumsy efforts to try and grab it. The major snatched up the grubby document and handed it over. "Thank you, sir," said the clerk, his sweaty face quite pitiful with gratitude. "Thank you so much." "Think nothing of it," murmured West. and the clerk gave a sycophantic little bow and hurried away. Jezal was disappointed. He had been rather enjoying the chase. There could be war, but that's the least of my troubles right now. West breathed a heavy sigh. My sister is in Adua. I didn't know you had a sister. Well, I do, and she's here, so? Jezal had little enthusiasm for hearing about the major's sister. West might have pulled himself up, but the rest of his family were distinctly beneath Jezal's notice. He was interested in meeting poor or common girls he could take advantage of, and rich, noble ones he might think about marrying. Anything in between was of no importance. Well, my sister can be charming, but she is also a little unconventional. She can be something of a handful in the wrong mood. Truth be told, I'd prefer to take care of a pack of Northmen than her. Come now, West, said Jezal absently, hardly taking any notice of what he was saying. I'm sure she can't be that difficult. The major brightened. Well, I'm relieved to hear you say that. She's always been keen to see the Agriant for herself, and I have been saying for years that I'd give her a tour if she ever came here. We'd arranged it for today, in fact. Jezal had a sinking feeling. Now, with this meeting, but I have so little time these days, whinged Jezal. I promise I'll make it up to you. We'll meet you at my quarters in an hour. Hold on! But West was already striding away. Don't let her be too ugly, Jezal was thinking as he slowly approached the door to Major West's quarters and raised his unwilling fist to knock. Just don't let her be too ugly. And not too stupid either. Anything but an afternoon wasted on a stupid girl. His hand was halfway to the door when he became aware of raised voices on the other side. He stood guiltily in the corridor, his ear drawing closer and closer to the wood, hoping to hear something complimentary about himself. And what about your maid? Came Major West's muffled voice, sounding greatly annoyed. I had to leave her at the house. There was a lot to do. Nobody's been there in months, West's sister. Jezal's heart sank. A deep voice. She sounded like a fat one. Jezal couldn't afford to be seen walking about the Agriant with a fat girl on his arm. It could ruin his reputation. But you can't just wander about the city on your own. I got here all right, didn't I? You're forgetting who we are, Cullum. I can make do without a servant. To most of the people here, I'm no better than a servant anyway. Besides, I'll have your friend Captain Luthar to look after me. That's even worse, as you damn well know. Well, I wasn't to know that you'd be busy. I would have thought you'd make the time to see your own sister. She didn't sound an idiot, which was something, but fat, and now peevish too. Aren't I safe with your friend? He's a good enough sort, but is he safe with you? Jezal wasn't sure what the major meant by that little comment. And walking about the Agriant alone, and with a man you hardly know. Don't play the fool. I know you better than that. What will people think? Shit on what they think. Jezal jerked away from the door. He wasn't used to hearing ladies use that sort of language. Fat, peevish and coarse, damn it. This might be even worse than he'd feared. He looked up the corridor, considering making a run for it, already working out his excuse. Curse his bad luck, though. Someone was coming up the stairs now. He couldn't leave without being seen. He would just have to knock and get it over with. He gritted his teeth and pounded resentfully at the door. The voices stopped suddenly, and Jezal put on an unconvincing friendly grin. Let the torture begin. The door swung open. For some reason, he had been expecting a kind of shorter, fatter version of Major West in a dress. He had been greatly mistaken. She was perhaps slightly fuller of figure than was strictly fashionable, since skinny girls were all the rage, but you couldn't call her fat, not fat at all. She had dark hair, dark skin, a little darker than would generally be thought ideal. He knew that a lady should remain out of the sun whenever possible, but looking at her, he really couldn't remember why. Her eyes were very dark, almost black, and blue eyes were turning the heads this season, but hers shone in the dim light of the doorway in a rather bewitching manner. She smiled at him. A strange sort of smile, higher on one side than the other. It gave him a slightly uneasy feeling, as though she knew something funny that he didn't. Still, excellent teeth, all white and shiny. Jezal's anger was swiftly vanishing. The longer he looked at her, the more her looks grew on him, and the emptier his head became of cogent thought. "Hello," she said. His mouth opened slightly as if by force of habit, but nothing came out. His mind was a blank page. And you must be Captain Luthar. I'm Cullum's sister. Arde, she slapped her forehead. I'm such an idiot, though. Colum will have told you all about me. I know the two of you are great friends." Jezal glanced awkwardly at the Major, who was frowning back at him and looking somewhat put out. It would hardly do to say he had been entirely unaware of her existence until that morning. He struggled to frame even a mildly amusing reply, but nothing came to mind. Artie took hold of him by the elbow and drew him into the room, talking all the while. "I know you're a great fencer, but I've been told your wit is even sharper than your sword. So much so, in fact, that you only use your sword upon your friends, as your wit is far too deadly." She looked at him expectantly. Silence. "Well," he mumbled, "I do fence a bit. Pathetic. Utterly awful. Is this the right man, or do I have the gardener here?" She looked him over with a strange expression, hard to read. Perhaps it was the same sort of look Jezal would have while examining a horse he was thinking of buying. Cautious, searching, intent, and ever so slightly disdainful. Even the gardeners have splendid uniforms, it seems. Jezal was almost sure that it had been some kind of insult, but he was too busy trying to think of something witty to pay it too much mind. He knew he would have to speak now or spend the entire day in embarrassed silence. So he opened his mouth and trusted to luck. "I'm sorry if I seem dumbfounded, but Major West is such an unattractive man. How could I have expected so beautiful a sister?" West snorted with laughter. His sister raised an eyebrow and counted the points off on her fingers. "Mildly offensive to my brother, which is good. Somewhat amusing, which is also good. Honest, which is refreshing, and wildly complimentary to me, which of course is excellent. A little late, but on the whole worth waiting for." She looked Jezal in the eye. The afternoon might not be a total loss. Jezal wasn't sure he liked that last comment, and he wasn't sure he liked the way she looked at him, but he was enjoying looking at her, so he was prepared to forgive a lot. The women of his acquaintance rarely said anything clever, especially the fine-looking ones. He supposed they were trained to smile and nod and listen while the men did the talking. On the whole, he agreed with that way of doing things, but the cleverness sat well on West's sister, and she had more than caught his curiosity. Fat and peevish were off the menu. Of that, there could be no doubt. As for coarse, well, handsome people are never coarse, are they? Just unconventional. He was beginning to think that the afternoon, as she had said, might not be a total loss. West made for the door. "It seems I must leave you two to make fools of one another. Lord Marshal Burr is expecting me." "Don't do anything I wouldn't, eh?" The comment seemed to be aimed at Jezal, but West was looking at his sister. "That would seem to allow virtually everything," she said, catching Jezal's eye. He was amazed to feel himself blushing like a little girl, and he coughed and looked down at his shoes. West rolled his eyes. "Mercy," he said, as the door clicked shut. "Why do you pair for a drink?" Artie asked, already pouring wine into a glass. Alone with a beautiful young woman. Hardly a new experience, Jezal told himself, and yet he seemed to be lacking his usual confidence. "Yes, thank you. Most kind. Yes. A drink. A drink. Just the thing to steady the nerves." She held the glass out to him and poured another for herself. He wondered if a young lady should be drinking at this time of day, but it seemed pointless to say anything. She wasn't his sister, after all. "Tell me, Captain, how do you know my brother?" "Well, he's my commanding officer, and we fence together." His brain was beginning to function again. "But then, you know that already," she grinned at him. "Of course, but my governess always maintained that young men should be allowed their share of the conversation." Jezal gave an ungainly cough as he was swallowing and spilled some wine down his jacket. "Oh dear," he said. "Here, take this a moment." She gave him her glass, and he took it without thinking, but then found himself without a free hand. When she started dabbing at his chest with a white handkerchief, he could hardly object, though it did seem rather forward. Being honest, he might have objected if she wasn't so damn fine-looking. He wondered if she realized what an excellent view she was giving him down the front of her dress. But of course not. How could she? She was simply new here, unused to courtly manners, the artless ways of a country girl, and so forth. Nice view, though. There was no denying that. "There, that's better," she said, though the dabbing had made no apparent difference. Not to his uniform, anyway. She took the glasses from him, drained her own quickly with a practiced flick of her head, and shoved them on the table. "Shall we go?" "Yes, of course." "Oh," and he offered her his arm. She led him out into the corridor and down the stairs, chatting freely. It was a flurry of conversational blows. And as Marshal Varuz had pointed out earlier, his defense was weak. He parried desperately as they made their way across the wide square of marshals, but he could barely get a word in. It seemed as though it was R.D. who had been living there for years, and Jezal, who was the bumpkin from the provinces. "The halls, Marshal, are behind there?" She nodded over at the looming wall that separated the headquarters of the Union's armies from the rest of the Agriant. "Indeed they are. That is where the Lord Marshals have their offices and so forth. And there are barracks there, and armories, and, He trailed off. He could not think of much else to say, but R.D. came to his rescue. "So my brother must be somewhere in there. He's quite the famous soldier, I suppose. First through the breach at Ulriach, and so on. Well, yes. Major West is very well respected here. He can be such a bore, though, can't he? He does so love to be mysterious and troubled." She put on a faint, faraway smile and rubbed her chin thoughtfully, just as her brother might have done. She had captured the man perfectly, and Jezal had to laugh. But he was starting to wonder if she should be walking quite so close beside him, holding his arm in quite so intimate a way. Not that he objected, of course. Quite the reverse, but people were looking. "Arde," he said. "So this must be the king's way." Yes. Arde. She was gazing up at the magnificent statue of Harad the Great, his stern eyes fixed on the middle distance. "Harad the Great?" she asked. Yes. Yes. In the Dark Ages, before there was a union, he fought to bring the three kingdoms together. He was the first High King. "You idiot," thought Jezal. "She knows that already. Everyone does." "Arde, I think your brother would not. And this is Bayaz, the first of the Magi." "Yes, he was Herod's most trusted advisor. Arde, is it true they still keep a vacant seat for him in the closed council?" Jezal was taken aback. "I'd heard that there's an empty chair there, but I didn't know that they all look so serious, don't they?" "I suppose those were serious times," he said, grinning lamely. A knight herald thundered down the avenue on a huge, well-lathered horse, the sun glinting on the golden wings of his helmet. Secretaries scattered to let him pass, and Jezal tried to guide R.D. gently out of the way. To his great dismay, she refused to be moved. The horse flashed past within a few inches of her, close enough for the wind to flick her hair in Jezal's face. She turned to him with a flush of excitement on her cheek, otherwise utterly undaunted by her brush with severe injury. "A knight herald?" she asked, taking Jezal's arm once again, and leading him off down the Kingsway. "Yes," squeaked Jezal, desperately trying to bring his voice under control. "For the Knights Herald are entrusted with a grave responsibility. They carry messages from the king to every part of the Union." His heart had stopped hammering. "Canaan hearts, Orel. They can't unite. We are wild, even across the Circle Sea to England, to Goska and Westport. They are entrusted to speak with the king's voice, and so forbidden from speaking except on the king's business. Fedor Dan Haddon was on the boat on our way over. Hez, a knight herald. We talked for hours. Jezal attempted unsuccessfully to contain his surprise. We talked about Adua, about the Union, about his family. Your name was mentioned, actually." Jezal failed to look nonchalant once again. In connection with the coming contest, R.D. leaned even closer to him. "Fedor was of the opinion that Bremer Dan Gorst will cut you to pieces." Jezal gave a strangled cough, but he rallied well. "Unfortunately, that opinion seems widely held, but not by you, I trust. Jess?" She stopped and took him by the hand, staring earnestly into his eyes. "I'm sure that you'll get the better of him, no matter what they say. My brother speaks very highly of you, and he's stingy with his praise." "But," mumbled Jezal. His fingers were tingling pleasantly. Her eyes were big and dark, and he found himself greatly at a loss for words. She had this way of biting on her lower lip that made his thoughts stray. A fine, full lip. He wouldn't have minded having a little chew on it himself. "Well, thank you," he gave a gormless grin. "So this is the park," said R.D., turning away from him to admire the greenery. "It's even more beautiful than I'd imagined." Yes, how wonderful to be at the heart of things. I've spent so much of my life on the edge. There must be many important decisions made here, many important people. R.D. allowed her hand to trail through the fronds of a willow tree by the road. Cullum's worried there might be war in the north. He was worried for my safety. I think that's why he wanted me to come here. I think he worries too much. What do you think, Captain Luthar? He had been in blissful ignorance of the political situation until a couple of hours before, but that would never do as a reply. Well, he said, straining to remember the name, and then with relief, this Bethard could do with a rap on the knuckles. They say he has 20,000 Northmen under his banner. She leaned towards him. Barbarians, she murmured. Savages, she whispered. I heard he skins his captives alive. Jezal thought this was hardly suitable conversation for a young lady. Our day, he began. But I'm sure with men like you and my brother to protect us, we women folk have nothing to worry about. And she turned and made off up the path. Jezal had to hurry once again to catch up. And is that the house of the Maker? R.D. nodded towards the grim outline of the huge tower. Why, yes it is. Does no one go inside? No one. Not in my lifetime anyway. The bridge is kept behind lock and key. He frowned up at the tower. Seemed strange now that he never thought about it. Living in the Adriant, it was always there. You just got used to it somehow. The place is sealed, I believe. Sealed? R.D. moved very close to him. Jezal glanced around nervously, but nobody was looking. Isn't it strange that nobody goes in there? Isn't it a mystery? He could almost feel her breath on his neck. I mean to say, why not just break the door down? Jezal was finding it horribly difficult to concentrate with her so close. He wondered for a moment, both frightening and exciting, whether she might be flirting with him. No, of course not. Just not used to the city was all, the artless ways of a country girl. But then she was very close. If only she were a little less attractive, or a little less confident. If only she were a little less West's sister. He coughed and looked off down the path, hoping vainly for a distraction. There were a few people moving along it, but no one that he recognized, unless Ouchtwhite. R.D.'s spell was suddenly broken, and Jezal felt his skin go cold. A hunched figure, overdressed on this sunny day, was limping toward them, leaning heavily on a cane. He was bent over and wincing with every step, the faster-moving travelers giving him a wide berth. Jezal tried to steer R.D. away before he saw them, but she resisted gracefully and made a direct line for the shambling inquisitor. His head snapped up as they approached, and his eyes glinted with recognition. Jezal's heart sank. There was no avoiding him now. Why, Captain Luthar, said Glokta warmly, shuffling a little too close and shaking his hand. What a pleasure! I'm surprised that Varus has let you go so early in the day. He must be mellowing in his old age. The Lord Marshal is still most demanding, snapped Jezal. I hope my practicals didn't inconvenience you the other night. The Inquisitor shook his head sadly. They have no manners at all, but they are the very best at what they do. I swear, the king doesn't have two more valuable servants. I suppose we all serve the king in our own way. There was a little more hostility in Jezal's voice than he had intended. If Glokta was offended, he didn't show it. Quite so. I don't believe I know your friend. No, this is actually we've met, said R.D., much to Jezal's surprise, giving her hand to the Inquisitor. R.D. West, Glokta's eyebrows rose. No. He bent down stiffly to kiss the back of her hand. Jezal saw his mouth twist as he straightened up, but the toothless grin soon returned. Column West's sister! Well, you were so much changed. For the better, I hope, she laughed. Jezal felt horribly uncomfortable. Why, yes, indeed, said Glokta, and you are changed also, Sand. R.D. looked suddenly very sad. We were all so worried in my family. We hoped and hoped for your safe return. Jezal saw a spasm run over Glokta's face. Then when we heard you were hurt, how are you? The Inquisitor glanced at Jezal, his eyes cold as a slow death. Jezal stared down at his boots, a lump of fear in his throat. He had no need to be scared of this cripple, did he? But somehow he wished he was still at fencing practice. Glokta stared at R.D., his left eye twitching slightly, and she looked back at him undaunted, her eyes full of quiet concern. I am well. As well as can be expected. His expression had turned very strange. Jezal felt more uncomfortable than ever. Nobody ever does. There was an awkward silence. The Inquisitor stretched his neck sideways and there was a loud click. "Ah," he said, "that's got it. It's been a pleasure to see you again, both of you, but duty calls." He treated them to another revolting smile, then hobbled off, his left foot scraping in the gravel. Ardy frowned at his twisted back as he limped slowly away. "It's so sad," she said under her breath. "What?" mumbled Jezal. He was thinking about that big white bastard in the street, those narrow pink eyes, the prisoner with the bag on his head. We all serve the king in our own way. Quite so. He gave an involuntary shiver. He and my brother used to be quite close. He came to stay with us one summer. My family were so proud to have him it was embarrassing. He used to fence with my brother every day, and he always won. The way he moved, it was something to see. Sanden Glokta. He was the brightest star in the sky. She flashed her knowing half-smile again. "And now I hear you are, said Jezal, not sure whether she was praising him or poking fun. He could not escape the feeling that he had been out-fenced twice that day, once by each sibling. He rather fancied that the sister had given him the worst beating. Chapter 3. The morning ritual. It was a bright summer's day, and the park was filled to capacity with colorful revelers. Colonel Glokta strode manfully towards some meeting of great importance, people bowing and scraping respectfully away to give him room. He ignored most, favored the more important ones with his brilliant smile. The lucky few beamed back at him, delighted to be noticed. "I suppose we all serve the king in our own way," whined Captain Luthar, reaching for his steel. But Glokta was far too quick for him. His blade flashed with lightning speed, catching the sneering idiot through the neck. Blood splattered across Ardy West's face. She clapped her hands in delight, looking at Glokta with shining eyes. Luthar seemed surprised to be killed. "Quite so," said Glokta with a smile. The captain pitched over onto his face, blood pouring from his punctured throat. The crowd roared their appreciation, and Glokta indulged them with a deep, graceful bow. The cheering was redoubled. "Oh, Colonel, you shouldn't," murmured Ardy as Glokta licked the blood from her cheek. "You shouldn't what?" he growled, tipping her back in his arms and kissing her fiercely. The crowd were in a frenzy. She gasped as he broke away, looking up at him adoringly with those big dark eyes of hers, lips slightly parted. "The Arthector want you," she said with a comely smile. "What?" The crowd had fallen silent, damn them, and his left side was turning numb. Ardy touched him tenderly on the cheek. "The Arthector," she shouted. There was a heavy knock at the door. Glokta's eyes flicked open. "Where am I? Who am I? Oh no! Oh yes." He realized straight away he had been sleeping badly. His body was twisted round under the blankets, his face pushed into the pillow. His whole left side was dead. The beating on the door came heavier than before. "The Arthector," came Frost's tongueless bellow from the other side. Pain shot through Glokta's neck as he tried to raise his head from the pillow. There's nothing like the first spasm of the day to get the mind working. "All right," he croaked. "Give me a minute, damn it." The albino's heavy footsteps thudded away down the corridor. Glokta lay still for a moment, then cautiously moved his right arm, ever so slowly, breath rasping with the effort, and tried to twist himself onto his back. He clenched his fist as the needling started in his left leg. If only the damn thing would stay numb. But the pain was coming on fast now. He was also becoming aware of an unpleasant smell. "Damn it! I've shit myself again. Barnum!" howled Glokta, then waited, panting, left side throbbing with a vengeance. "Where is the old idiot? Barnum?" He screamed at the top of his lungs. "Are you all right, sir?" came the servant's voice from beyond the door. All right, you old fool." "Eh? The old fool?" "Just when do you think I was last all right?" "No, damn it. I've soiled the bed. I've boiled water for a bath, sir. Can you get up?" Once before Frost had to break the door down. Maybe I should let it stand open all night, but then how could I sleep? "I think I can manage," Glokta hissed, tongue pressed into his empty gums, arms trembling as he hauled himself out of the bed and onto the chair beside it. His grotesque, toeless left leg twitched to itself, still beyond his control. He glared down at it with a burning hatred. Fucking horrible thing. Revolting, useless lump of flesh. Why didn't they just cut you off? Why don't I still? But he knew why not. With his leg still on, he could at least pretend to be half a man. He punched his withered thigh, then immediately regretted it. Stupid. Stupid. The pain crept up his back, a little more intense than before, and growing with every second. Come now. Come now. Let's not fight. He started to rub gently at the wasted flesh. We are stuck with each other, so why torment me? Can you get to the door, sir? Glokta wrinkled his nose at the smell, then took hold of his cane and slowly, agonizingly, pushed himself to his feet. He hobbled across the room, almost slipping halfway there, but righting himself with a searing twinge. He turned the key in the lock, leaning against the wall for balance, and hauled the door open. Barnum was standing on the other side, his arms outstretched, ready to catch him. The ignominy of it. To think that I, Sand Dan Glokta, the greatest swordsman the Union has ever seen, must be carried to my bath by an old man, so that I can wash my own shit off. They must be laughing loud now. All those fools I beat, if they still remember me. I'd be laughing too if it didn't hurt so much. But he let the weight off his left leg and put his arm round Barnum's shoulders without complaint. What's the use after all? Might as well make it easy for myself. As easy as it can be. Glokta took a deep breath. Go gently, the leg hasn't woken up yet. They hopped and stumbled down the corridor, slightly too narrow for both of them together. The bathroom seemed a mile away, or more. I'd rather walk 100 miles as I used to be, than to the bathroom as I am. But that's my bad luck, isn't it? You can't go back. Not ever. The steam felt deliciously warm on Glokta's clammy skin. With Barnum holding him under the arms, he slowly lifted his right leg and put it gingerly into the water. Damn it. That's hot. The old servant helped him get the other leg in, then, taking him under the armpits, lowered him like a child, until he was immersed up to his neck. Ah, Glokta cracked a toothless smile. Hot as the maker's forge, Barnum. Just the way I like it. The heat was getting into the leg now, and the pain was subsiding. Not gone. Never gone, but better. A lot better. Glokta began to feel almost as if he could face another day. You have to learn to love the small things in life, like a hot bath. You have to love the small things when you've nothing else. Practical Frost was waiting for him downstairs in the tiny dining room, his bulk wedged into a low chair against the wall. Glokta sagged into the other chair and caught a whiff from the steaming porridge bowl, wooden spoon sticking up at an angle without even touching the side. His stomach rumbled and his mouth began watering fiercely. All the symptoms, in fact, of extreme nausea. Hurry, shouted Glokta. Porridge again. He looked over at the motionless Practical. Porridge and honey, better than money, everything's funny with porridge and honey. The pink eyes did not blink. It's a rhyme for children. My mother used to sing it to me. Never actually got me to eat this slop, though. But now, and he dug the spoon in. I can't get enough of it. Frost stared back at him. Healthy, said Glokta, forcing down a mouthful of sweet mush and spooning up another. Delicious, choking down some more. And here's the real clincher. He gagged slightly on the next swallow. No chewing required. He shoved the mostly full bowl away and tossed the spoon after it. He hummed. A good breakfast makes for a good day, don't you find? It was like staring at a whitewashed wall, but without all the emotion. So the Archlector wants me again, does he? The albino nodded. And what might our illustrious leader desire with the likes of us, do you think? A shrug. Glokta licked bits of porridge out of his empty gums. Does he seem in a good mood, do you know? Another shrug. Come, Practical Frost. Don't tell me everything at once, I can't take it in. Silence. Barnum entered the room and cleared away the bowl. Do you want anything else, sir? Absolutely. A big half-raw slab of meat and a nice crunchy apple. He looked over at Practical Frost. I used to love apples when I was a child. How many times have I made that joke? Frost looked back impassively. There was no laughter there. Glokta turned to Barnum, and the old man gave a tired smile. Oh, well, sighed Glokta. A man has to have hope, doesn't he? "Of course, sir," muttered the servant, heading for the door. "Does he?" The Archlector's office was on the top floor of the House of Questions, and it was a long way up. Worse still, the corridors were busy with people. Practicals, clerks, inquisitors, crawling like ants through a crumbling dunghill. Whenever he felt their eyes on him, Glokta would limp along, smiling, head held high. Whenever he felt himself alone, he would pause and gasp, sweat and curse, and rub and slap the tenuous life back into his leg. "Why does it have to be so high?" he asked himself, as he shuffled up the dim halls and winding stairs of the labyrinthine building. By the time he reached the antechamber, he was exhausted and blowing hard, left hand sore on the handle of his cane. The Archlector's secretary examined him suspiciously from behind a big dark desk that took up half the room. There were some chairs placed opposite for people to get nervous waiting in, and 2 huge practicals flanked the great double doors to the office, so still and grim as to appear a part of the furniture. "Do you have an appointment?" demanded the secretary in a shrill voice. "You know who I am, you self-important little shit." "Of course," snapped Glokta. "Do you think I limped all the way up here to admire your desk?" The secretary looked down his nose at him. He was a pale, handsome young man with a mop of yellow hair, the puffed-up 5th son of some minor nobleman with overactive loins. "And he thinks he can patronize me?" "And your name is?" he asked with a sneer. Glokta's patience was worn out by the climb. He smashed his cane down on the top of the desk, and the secretary near jumped out of his chair. "What are you, a fucking idiot? How many crippled inquisitors do you have here? How many crippled inquisitors do you have here?" Union, und Celestine, said the secretary, mouth working nervously. Is that a number? Speak up." "Well, I'm Glokta, you dolt. Inquisitor Glokta." "Yes, sir. Get your fat ass out of that chair, fool." "Don't keep me waiting." The secretary sprang up, hurried to the doors, pushed one open, and stood aside respectfully. "That's better," growled Glokta, shuffling after him. He looked up at the practicals as he hobbled past. He was almost sure one of them had a slight smile on his face. The room had hardly changed since he was last there, 6 years before. It was a cavernous, round space, domed ceiling, carved with gargoyle faces, its one enormous window offering a spectacular view over the spires of the university, a great section of the outer wall of the Agriant, and the looming outline of the house of the Maker beyond. The chamber was mostly lined with shelves and cabinets, stacked high with neatly ordered files and papers. A few dark portraits peered down from the sparse white walls, including a huge one of the current king of the Union, as a young man, looking wise and stern, no doubt painted before he became a senile joke. These days there's usually a bit less authority and a bit more stray drool about him. There was a heavy round table in the center of the room, its surface painted with a map of the Union in exquisite detail. Every city in which there was a department of the Inquisition was marked with a precious stone, and a tiny silver replica of Adua rose out of the table at its hub. The Archlector was sitting in an ancient high chair at this table, deep in conversation with another man, a gaunt, balding, sour-faced old fellow in dark robes. Sult beamed up as Glokta shuffled towards them. The other man's expression hardly changed. "Why, Inquisitor Glokta, delighted you could join us. Do you know Surveyor General Halleck?" "I have not had the pleasure," said Glokta. "Not that it looks like much of a pleasure, though." The old bureaucrat stood and shook Glokta's hand without enthusiasm. "And this is one of my inquisitors, Sandan Glokta." "Yes, indeed," murmured Halleck. "You used to be in the army, I believe. I saw you fence once." Glokta tapped his leg with his cane. "That can't have been any time recently." "No?" There was a silence. "The Surveyor General is likely soon to receive a most significant promotion," said Sult. To a chair on the closed council itself. The closed council. Indeed. A most significant promotion. Halleck seemed less than delighted, however. "I will consider it done when it is His Majesty's pleasure to invite me," he snapped, "and not before." Sult floated smoothly over this rocky ground. "I am sure the council feels that you are the only candidate worth recommending, now that Sepp Dan Teufel is no longer being considered." "Our old friend, Teufel? No longer considered for what?" Halleck frowned and shook his head. "Teufel. I worked with the man for 10 years. I never liked him or anyone else, by the look of you. But I would never have thought him a traitor." Salt shook his head sadly. "Sadly, we all feel it keenly, but here is his confession in black and white." He held up the folded paper with a doleful frown. "I fear the roots of corruption can run very deep. Who would know that better than I, whose sorry task it is to weed the garden?" "Indeed, indeed," muttered Halleck, nodding grimly. "You deserve all of our thanks for that. You also, Inquisitor." "Oh no, not I," said Glokta humbly. The three men looked at each other in a sham of mutual respect. Halleck pushed back his chair. "Well, taxes do not collect themselves. I must return to my work." "Enjoy your last few days in the job," said Salt. "I give you my word that the king will send for you soon." Halleck allowed himself the thinnest of smiles, then nodded stiffly to them and stalked away. The secretary ushered him out and pulled the heavy door shut. There was silence. "But I'm damned if I'll be the one to break it. I expect you're wondering what this was all about, eh, Glokta?" "The thought had crossed my mind, Your Eminence. I bet it had." Salt swept from his chair and strode across to the window, his white-gloved hands clasped behind his back. "The world changes, Glokta, the world changes. The old order crumbles. The old order crumbles. Loyalty, duty, pride, honor, notions that have fallen far from fashion. What has replaced them?" He glanced over his shoulder for a moment, and his lip curled. "Greed. Merchants have become the new power in the land. Bankers, shopkeepers, salesmen. Little men, with little minds and little ambitions. Men whose only loyalty is to themselves, whose only duty is to their own purses, whose only pride is in swindling their betters, whose only honor is weighed out in silver coin. No need to ask where you stand on the merchant class." Zalt scowled out at the view, then turned back into the room. "Now it seems anyone's son can get an education, and a business, and become rich. The merchant guilds, the mercers, the spicers and their like, grow steadily in wealth and influence. Jumped up, posturing commoners dictating to their natural betters, their fat and greedy fingers fumbling at the strings of power. It is almost too much to stand." He gave a shudder as he paced across the floor. "I will speak honestly with you, Inquisitor." The Archlector waved his graceful hand as though his honesty were a priceless gift. "The Union has never seemed more powerful, has never controlled more land, but beneath the facade we are weak. It is hardly a secret that the king has become entirely unable to make his own decisions. Crown Prince Ladisla is a fop, surrounded by flatterers and fools, caring for nothing but gambling and clothes. Prince Raynol is far better fitted to rule, but he is the younger brother. The closed council, whose task it should be to steer this leaking vessel, is packed with frauds and schemers. Some may be loyal, some are definitely not, each intent on pulling the king his own way. How frustrating, when I suppose they should all be pulling him in yours. Meanwhile, the Union is beset with enemies, dangers outside our borders, and dangers within. Gurkul has a new and vigorous emperor, fitting his country for another war. The Northmen are up in arms as well, skulking on the borders of England. In the open council, the noblemen clamor for ancient rights, while in the villages, the peasants clamor for new ones." He gave a deep sigh. "Yes, the old order crumbles, and no one has the heart or the stomach to support it." Salt paused, staring up at one of the portraits. A hefty, bald man dressed all in white. Glokta recognized him well enough. Zoller, the greatest of all archlectors, tireless champion of the Inquisition, hero to the torturer, scourge of the disloyal. He glared down balefully from the wall, as though even beyond death he could burn traitors with a glance. "Zoller," growled Salt. "Things were different in his day, I can tell you. No winging peasants then, no swindling merchants, no sulking noblemen. If men forgot their place, they were reminded with hot iron, and any carping judge who dared to whine about it was never heard from again. The Inquisition was a noble institution, filled with the best and the brightest. To serve their king and to root out disloyalty were their only desires and their only rewards. Oh, things were grand in the old days." The Archlector slid back into his seat and leaned forward across the table. Now we have become a place where third sons of impoverished noblemen can line their pockets with bribes, or where near criminal scum can indulge a passion for torture. Our influence with the king has been steadily eroded. Our budgets have been steadily cut. Once we were feared and respected, Glokta, but now we're a miserable sham. Salt frowned. Well, less so. Intrigues and treasons abound, and I fear that the Inquisition is no longer equal to its task. Too many of the superiors can no longer be trusted. They are no longer concerned with the interests of the king, or of the state, or of anybody's interests beyond their own. The superiors, not to be trusted. I swoon with the shock. Salt's frown grew still deeper, and now Feet is dead. Glokta looked up. Now that is news. The Lord Chancellor. It will become public knowledge tomorrow morning. He died suddenly a few nights ago, while you were busy with your friend Ruse. There are still some questions surrounding his death, but the man was nearly 90. The surprise is that he lasted this long. The Golden Chancellor, they called him. The greatest politician of his day. Even now they are setting his likeness in stone, for a statue on the Kingsway. Salt snorted to himself. The greatest gift that any of us can hope for. The Archlector's eyes narrowed to blue slits. If you have any childish notions that the Union is controlled by its king, or by those prating blue-blood fools on the open council, you can let them wilt now. The closed council is where the power lies. More than ever since the king's illness. 12 men, in 12 big, uncomfortable chairs, myself among them. 12 men, with very different ideas, and for 20 years, war and peace. Feet held us in balance. He played off the Inquisition against the judges, the bankers against the military. He was the axle on which the kingdom turned, the foundation on which it rested, and his death has left a hole, all kinds of gaping holes, and people will be rushing to fill them. I have a feeling that whining Asmarovia, that bleeding heart of a high justice, that self-appointed champion of the common man, will be first in the queue. It is a fluid and a dangerous situation. The Archlector planted his fists firmly on the table before him. We must ensure that the wrong people do not take advantage of it. Glokta nodded. I think I take your meaning, Archlector. I think I take your meaning, Archlector. We must ensure that it is we who take advantage, and no one else. It need hardly be said that the post of Lord Chancellor is one of the most powerful in the realm. The gathering of taxes, the treasury, the king's mints, all come under his auspices. Money. Glokta, money. And money is power. I need hardly tell you. A new chancellor will be appointed tomorrow. The foremost candidate was our erstwhile master of the mints. Sepp Dan Teufel, I see. Something tells me he will no longer be under consideration. Salt's lip curled. Teufel was closely linked with the merchant guilds, and the mercers in particular. His sneer became a scowl, in addition to which he was an associate of High Justice Morovia. So, you see, he would hardly have made a suitable Lord Chancellor. No, indeed, hardly suitable. Surveyor General Halleck is a far better choice, in my opinion. Glokta looked towards the door. Him? Lord Chancellor? Salt got up smiling and moved over to a cabinet against the wall. There really is no one else. Everyone hates him, and he hates everyone, except me. Furthermore, he is a hard-nosed conservative, who despises the merchant class and everything they stand for. He opened the cabinet and took out 2 glasses and an ornate decanter. If not exactly a friendly face on the council, he will at least be a sympathetic one, and damned hostile toward everyone else. I can hardly think of a more suitable candidate. Glokta nodded. He seems honest, but not so honest that I'd trust him to put me in the bath. Would you, Your Eminence? Yes, said Salt. He will be very valuable to us. He poured out 2 glasses of rich red wine, and just as a bonus, I was able to arrange for a sympathetic new master of the mints as well. I hear that the mercers are absolutely biting their tongues off with fury. Morovia's none too happy either, the bastard. Salt chuckled to himself. All good news, and we have you to thank. He held out one of the glasses. Poison. A slow death twitching and puking on the Archlector's lovely mosaic floor, or just pitching onto my face on his table. But there was really no option but to grasp the glass and take a hearty swig. The wine was unfamiliar but delicious, probably from somewhere very beautiful and far away. At least if I die up here, I won't have to make it back down all those steps. But the Archlector was drinking too, all smiles and good grace, so I suppose I will last out the afternoon after all. Yes, we have made a good first step. These are dangerous times, all right, and yet danger and opportunity often walk hand in hand. Glokta felt a strange sensation creeping up his back. Is that fear, or ambition, or both? I need someone to help me put matters in order. Someone who does not fear the superiors, or the merchants, or even the closed council. Someone who can be relied upon to act with subtlety and discretion and ruthlessness. Someone to take the fall if things turn sour. Someone who will have few mourners at their funeral. I have need of an inquisitor-exempt Glokta. Someone to operate beyond the superior's control, but with my full authority. Someone answerable only to me. The Archlector raised an eyebrow, as though the thought had only just come to him. It strikes me that you are exceptionally well suited to this task. What do you think? I think the holder of such a post would have a great many enemies and only one friend. Glokta peered up at the Archlector, and that friend might not be so very reliable. I think the holder of such a post might not last long. Could I have some time to consider it? No, danger and opportunity often walk hand in hand. Then I accept. Excellent. I do believe this is the start of a long and productive relationship. Salt smiled at him over the rim of his glass. You know, Glokta, of all the merchants grubbing away out there, it is the mercers I find the most unpalatable. It was largely through their influence that Westport entered the Union, and it was because of Westport's money that we won the Gurkish War. The king rewarded them, of course, with priceless trading rights, but ever since then their arrogance has been insufferable. Anyone would have thought they fought the battles themselves, for the airs they have put on and the liberties they have taken. The Honorable Guild of Mercers, he sneered. It occurs to me, now that your friend Ruse has given us the means to hook them in so deeply, it would be a shame to let them wriggle free. Glokta was much surprised, though he thought he hit it well. To go further? Why? The mercers wriggle free and they keep on paying, and that keeps all kinds of people happy. As things are, they're scared and soft, wondering who Ruse named, who might be next in the chair. If we go further, they may be hurt or finished entirely. Then they'll stop paying, and a lot of people will be unhappy, some of them in this very building. I can easily continue my investigations, Your Eminence, if you would like me to. Glokta took another sip. It really was an excellent wine. We must be cautious, and very thorough. The mercers' money flows like milk. They have many friends, even amongst the highest circles of the nobility. Brock, Huygen, Isher, and plenty more besides. Some of the very greatest men in the land. They've all been known to suck at that tit, one time or another, and babies will cry when their milk is snatched away. A cruel grin flickered across Salt's face. But still, if children are to learn discipline, they must sometimes be made to weep. Who did that worm Ruse name in his confession? Glokta leaned forward painfully and slid Ruse's paper of confession toward him, unfolded it, and scanned the list of names from bottom to top. Sepp Dan Teufel, we all know. Oh, we know and love him, Inquisitor, said Salt, beaming down. But I feel we may safely cross him off the list. Who else? Well, let's see. Glokta took a leisurely look back at the paper. There's Harrod Post, a mercer, a nobody. Salt waved his hand impatiently. He's nobody. Solimo Scandi, a mercer from Westport, also nobody. No, Glokta. We can do better than Solimo what's his name, can't we? These little mercers are of no real interest. Pull up the root, and the leaves die by themselves. Quite so, Archlector. We have Willem Dan Rob, minor nobility, holds a junior customs post. Salt looked thoughtful, shook his head. Then there's Waite, Willem Dan Rob. The Archlector snapped his fingers. His brother Caral is one of the Queen's gentlemen. He snubbed me at a social gathering. Salt smiled. Yes, Willem Dan Rob. Bring him in. And so we go deeper. I serve and obey, Your Eminence. Is there anyone's name in particular that need be mentioned? Glokta set down his empty glass. No. The Archlector turned away and waved his hand again. Any of them. All of them. I don't care. Chapter 4. First of the Magi, the lake stretched away, fringed by steep rocks and dripping greenery, surface pricked by the rain, flat and gray as far as the eye could see. Logen's eye couldn't see too far in this weather, it had to be said. The opposite shore could have been 100 strides away, but the calm waters looked deep, very deep. Logen had long ago given up any attempt at staying dry, and the water ran through his hair and down his face, dripped from his nose, his fingers, his chin. Being wet, tired, and hungry had become a part of life. It often had been, come to think on it. He closed his eyes and felt the rain patter against his skin, heard the water lapping on the shingle. He knelt by the lake, pulled the stopper from his flask and pushed it under the surface, watched the bubbles break as it filled up. Malachus Quay stumbled out of the bushes, breathing fast and shallow. He sank down to his knees, crawled against the roots of a tree, coughed out phlegm onto the pebbles. His coughing sounded bad now. It came right up from his guts and made his whole rib cage rattle. He was even paler than he had been when they first met, and a lot thinner. Logen was somewhat thinner too. These were lean times, all in all. He walked over to the haggard apprentice and squatted down. "Just give me a moment." Quay closed his sunken eyes and tipped his head back. "Just a moment." His mouth hung open, the tendons in his scrawny neck standing out. He looked like a corpse already. "Don't rest too long. You might never get up." Logen held out the flask. Quay didn't even lift his arm to take it, so Logen put it against his lips and tipped it up a little. He took a wincing swallow, coughed. Then his head dropped back against the tree like a stone. "Do you know where we are?" asked Logen. The apprentice blinked out at the water as though he'd only just noticed it. "This must be the north end of the lake. There should be a track." His voice had sunk to a whisper. "At the southern end there's a road with 2 stones. He gave a sudden violent cough, swallowed with difficulty. "Follow the road over the bridge, and you're there," he croaked. Logen looked off along the beach at the dripping trees. "How far is it?" No answer. He took hold of the sick man's bony shoulder and shook it. Quay's eyelids flickered open. He stared up blearily, trying to focus. "How far?" 40 miles. Logen sucked his teeth. Quay wouldn't be walking 40 miles. He'd be lucky to make 40 strides on his own. He knew it well enough. You could see it in his eyes. He'd be dead soon, Logen reckoned. A few days at the most. He'd seen stronger men die of a fever. 40 miles. Logen thought about it carefully, rubbing his chin with his thumb. 40 miles. "Shit," he whispered. He dragged the pack over and pulled it open. They had some food left, but not much. A few shreds of tough dried meat, a heel of moldy black bread. He looked out over the lake, so peaceful. They wouldn't be running out of drinking water any time soon, at least. He pulled his heavy cookpot out of his pack and set it down on the shingle. They'd been together a long time, but there was nothing left to cook. "You can't become attached to things not out here in the wild." He tossed the rope away into the bushes, then threw the lightened pack over his shoulder. Quay's eyes had closed again, and he was scarcely breathing. Logen still remembered the first time he had to leave someone behind. Remembered it like it was yesterday. Strange how the boy's name had gone, but the face was with him still. The shanka had taken a piece out of his thigh. A big piece. He'd moaned all the way he couldn't walk. The wound was going bad. He was dying anyway. They had to leave him. No one had blamed Logen for it. The boy had been too young. He should never have gone. Bad luck was all. Could happen to anyone. "Heed!" cried after them, as they made their way down the hillside in a grim, silent group, heads down. Logen seemed to hear the cries even when they'd left him far behind. He could still hear them. In the wars it had been different. Men dropped from the columns all the time on the long marches in the cold months. First they fell to the back. Then they fell behind. Then they fell over. The cold, the sick, the wounded. Logen shivered and hunched his shoulders. At first he tried to help them. Then he became grateful he wasn't one of them. Then he stepped over the corpses and hardly noticed them. "You learn to tell when someone isn't getting up again." He looked at Malachus Quay. One more death in the wild was nothing to remark upon. You have to be realistic after all. The apprentice started from his fitful sleep and tried to push himself up. His hands were shaking bad. He looked up at Logen, eyes glittering bright. "I can't get up," he croaked. "I know. I'm surprised you made it this far. It didn't matter so much now." Logen knew the way. If he could find that track, he might make 20 miles a day, if you leave me some of the food. Perhaps, after you get to the library. Someone, no, said Logen, setting his jaw. I need the food. Quay made a strange sound, somewhere between a cough and a sob. Logen leaned down and set his right shoulder in Quay's stomach, pushed his arm under his back. I can't carry you 40 miles without it. And he straightened up, hauling the apprentice over his shoulder. He set off down the shore, holding Quay in place by his jacket, his boots crunching into the wet shingle. The apprentice didn't even move, just hung there like a sack of wet rags, his limp arms knocking against the backs of Logen's legs. When he'd made it 30 strides or so, Logen turned around and looked back. The pot was sitting forlorn by the lake, already filling up with rainwater. They'd been through a lot together, him and that pot. Fare you well, old friend. The pot did not reply. Logen set his shivering burden gently down at the side of the road and stretched his aching back, scratched at the dirty bandage on his arm, took a drink of water from his flask. Water was the only thing to have passed his sore lips that day, and the hunger was gnawing at his guts. At least it had stopped raining. You have to learn to love the small things in life, like dry boots. You have to love the small things, when you've nothing else. Logen spat in the dirt and rubbed the life back into his fingers. There was no missing the place, that was sure. The 2 stones towered over the road, ancient and pitted, patched with green moss at the base and gray lichen higher up. They were covered in faded carvings, lines of letters in a script Logen couldn't understand, didn't even recognize. There was a forbidding feel about them, though, a sense more of warning than welcome. The first law. What? Said Logen, surprised. Quay had been in an unpleasant place between sleep and waking ever since they left the pot behind 2 days before. The pot could have made more meaningful sounds in that time. That morning Logen had woken to find him scarcely breathing. He'd been sure that he was dead, to begin with, but the man was still clinging weakly to life. He didn't give up easy. You had to give him that. Logen knelt down and shoved the wet hair out of Quay's face. The apprentice suddenly grabbed his wrist and started forward. It's forbidden, he whispered, staring at Logen with wide eyes. To touch the other side, eh? To speak with devils, he croaked, grabbing hold of Logen's battered coat. The creatures of the world below are made of lies. You mustn't do it. I won't, muttered Logen, wondering if he'd ever know what the apprentice was talking about. I won't. For what that's worth. It wasn't worth much. Quay had already dropped back into his twitching half-sleep. Logen chewed it at his lip. He hoped the apprentice would wake again, but he didn't think it likely. Still, perhaps this Bayaz would be able to do something. He was the first of the Magi after all, great in high wisdom and so on. So Logen hefted Quay up onto his shoulder again and trudged between the ancient stones. The road climbed steep into the rocks above the lake, here built up, there cut deep into the stony ground. It was worn and pitted with age, pocked with weeds. It switched back on itself again and again, and soon Logen was panting and sweating, his legs burning with the effort. His pace began to slow. The fact was, he was getting tired. Not just tired from the climb, or from the back-breaking slog he'd walked that day with a half-dead apprentice over his shoulder, or from the slog the day before, or even from the fight in the woods. He was tired of everything, of the Shanka, of the wars, of his whole life. I can't walk forever, Malachus. I can't fight forever. How much of this horrible shit should a man have to take? I need to sit down a minute, in a proper fucking chair. Is that too much to ask? Is it? In this frame of mind, cursing and grumbling at every step, and with Quay's head knocking against his arse, Logen came to the bridge. It was as ancient as the road, coated with creepers, simple and slender, arching maybe 20 strides across a dizzying gorge. Far below, a river surged over jagged rocks, filling the air with noise and shining spray. On the far side, a high wall had been built between towering faces of mossy stone. Made with such care it was difficult to say where the natural cliff ended and the man-made one began. A single ancient door was set into it, faced with beaten copper, turned streaky green by the wet and the years. As Logen picked his way carefully across the slippery stone, he found himself wondering, through force of habit, how you could storm this place. You couldn't. Not with 1,000 picked men. There was only a narrow shelf of rock before the door, no room to set a ladder or swing a ram. The wall was 10 strides high at least, and the gate had a dreadful solid look. And if the defenders were to bring down the bridge, Logen peered over the edge and swallowed. It was a long way down. He took a deep breath and thumped on the damp green copper with his fist. 4 big, booming knocks. He'd beat on the gates of Carlion like that after the battle, and its people had rushed to surrender. No one rushed to do anything now. He waited. He knocked again. He waited. He became wetter and wetter in the mist from the river. He ground his teeth. He raised his arm to knock again. A narrow hatch snapped open, and a pair of rheumy eyes stared at him coldly from between thick bars. "Logen Ninefingers is my name. I've never heard of you. Hardly the welcome Logen had been hoping for. I've come to see Bayaz." No reply. The first of a yes. "He's here." But the door didn't open. "He isn't taking visitors. I told that to the last messenger. I'm no messenger. I have Malachus Quay with me." "Malachus what?" "Quay, the apprentice." "Apprentice? He's very ill," said Logen slowly. "He may die." "Ill, you say? Die, was it?" "Yes." "And what was your name again? Just open the fucking door." Logen shook his fist pointlessly at the slot. "Please. We don't let just anyone in." "Hold up. Show me your hands." "What?" "Your hands." Logen held his hands up. The watery eyes moved slowly across his fingers. "There are 9. There's one missing, see?" He shoved the stump at the hatch. "9, is it? You should have said." Bolts clanked and the door creaked slowly open. An elderly man, bent under an old-fashioned suit of armor, was staring at him suspiciously from the other side. He was holding a long sword much too heavy for him. Its point wobbled around wildly as he strained to keep it upright. Logen held up his hands. "I surrender." The ancient gatekeeper was not amused. He grunted sourly as Logen stepped past him. Then he wrestled the door shut and fumbled with the bolts, turned and trudged away without another word. Logen followed him up a narrow valley lined with strange houses, weathered and mossy, half dug into the steep rocks, merging with the mountainside. A dour-faced woman was working at a spinning wheel on a doorstep, and she frowned at Logen as he walked past with the unconscious apprentice over his shoulder. Logen smiled back at her. She was no beauty, that was sure, but it had been a very long time. The woman ducked into her house and kicked the door shut, leaving the wheel spinning. Logen sighed. The old magic was still there. The next house was a bakery with a squat, smoking chimney. The smell of baking bread made Logen's empty stomach rumble. Further on, a couple of dark-haired children were laughing and playing, running round a scrubby old tree. They reminded Logen of his own children. They didn't look anything like them, but he was in a morbid frame of mind. He had to admit to being a little disappointed. He'd been expecting something cleverer looking, and a lot more beards. These folk didn't seem so very wise. They looked just like any other peasants, not unlike his own village had looked before the Shanka came. He wondered if he was in the right place. Then they rounded a bend in the road. 3 great, tapering towers were built into the mountainside ahead, joined at their bases, but separating higher up, covered in dark ivy. They seemed far older even than the ancient bridge and road, as old as the mountain itself. A jumbled mess of other buildings crowded around their feet, straggling around the sides of a wide courtyard in which people were busy with everyday chores. A thin woman was churning some milk on a stoop. A stocky blacksmith was trying to shoe a restless mare. An old bald butcher in a stained apron had finished chopping up some animal and was washing his bloody forearms in a trough. And on a set of wide steps before the tallest of the 3 towers sat a magnificent old man. He was dressed all in white, with a long beard, a hook nose, and white hair spilling from under a white skullcap. Logen was impressed. Finally, the first of the Magi surely looked the part. As Logen shuffled towards him, he started up from the steps and hurried over, white coat flapping behind him. "Set him down here," he muttered, indicating a patch of grass by the well, and Logen knelt and dumped Quay on the ground as gently as he could with his back aching so much. The old man bent over him, laid a gnarled hand on his forehead. "I brought your apprentice back," muttered Logen pointlessly. "Mine? Aren't you Bayaz?" The old man laughed. "Oh no, I am Wells, head servant here at the library." "I am Bayaz," came a voice from behind. The butcher was walking slowly toward them, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked maybe 60 but heavily built, with a strong face, deeply lined, and a close-cropped gray beard around his mouth. He was entirely bald, and the afternoon sun shone brightly off his tanned pate. He was neither handsome nor majestic, but as he came closer there did seem to be something about him. An assurance, an air of command. A man used to giving orders and to being obeyed. The first of the Magi took Logen's left hand in both of his and pressed it warmly. Then he turned it over and examined the stump of his missing finger. Logen Ninefingers, then. The one they call the Bloody Nine. I have heard stories about you, even shut up here in my library. Logen winced. He could guess what sort of stories the old man might have heard. That was a long time ago. Of course. We all have a past, eh? I make no judgments on hearsay. And Bayaz smiled, a broad, white, beaming smile. His face lit up with friendly creases, but a hardness lingered around his eyes, deep set and glistening green. A stony hardness. Logen grinned back, but he reckoned already that he wouldn't want to make an enemy of this man. And you have brought our missing lamb back to the fold. Bayaz frowned down at Malachus Quay, motionless on the grass. How is he? I think he will live, sir, said Wells, but we should get him out of the cold. The first of the Magi snapped his fingers and a sharp crack echoed from the buildings. Help him. The smith hurried forward and took Quay's feet, and together he and Wells carried the apprentice through the tall door into the library. Now, Master Ninefingers, I have called, and you have answered, and that shows good manners. Manners might be out of fashion in the north, but I want you to know that I appreciate them. Courtesy should be answered with courtesy, I have always thought. But what's this now? The old gatekeeper was hurrying back across the yard, greatly out of breath. 2 visitors in one day? Whatever next? Master Bayaz, wheezed the gatekeeper. There's riders at the gate, well-horsed and well-armed. They say they've an urgent message from the king of the Northmen. Bethod, it had to be. The spirits had said he had given himself a golden hat, and who else would have dared to call himself king of the Northmen? Logen swallowed. He got away from their last meeting with his life, and nothing else. And yet it was better than many had managed, far better. Well, master, asked the gatekeeper, shall I tell them to be off? Who leads them? A fancy lad with a sour face. Said he's this king's son or something. Was it Calder or Scale? They're both something sour. The younger one, I reckon. Calder, then. That was something. Either one was bad, but Scale was much the worse. Both together were an experience to be avoided. Bayaz seemed to consider a moment. Prince Calder may enter, but his men must remain beyond the bridge. Yes, sir, beyond the bridge. The gatekeeper wheezed away. He'd love that, would Calder. Logen was greatly tickled by the thought of the so-called prince screaming uselessly through that little slot. The king of the Northmen now, can you imagine? Bayaz stared absently off down the valley. I knew Bethod when he was not so grand. And so did you, Master Ninefingers? Logen frowned. He'd known Bethod when he was next to nothing. A little chieftain like so many others. Logen had come for help against the Shanka, and Bethod had given it, at a price. Back then the price had seemed light, and well worth the paying. Just to fight, to kill a few men. Logen had always found killing easy, and Bethod had seemed a man well worth fighting for, bold, proud, ruthless, venomously ambitious. All qualities that Logen had admired, back then, all qualities he thought he had himself. But time had changed them both, and the price had risen. He used to be a better man. Bayaz was musing, but crowns sit badly on some people. Do you know his sons? Better than I'd like. Bayaz nodded. They're absolute shit, aren't they? And I fear now they will never improve. Imagine that pinhead Scale a king. Ugh! The wizard shuddered. It almost makes you want to wish his father a long life. Almost, but not quite. The little girl that Logen had seen playing scurried over. She had a chain of yellow flowers in her hands, and she held it up to the old wizard. I made this, she said. Logen could hear the rapid pounding of hooves coming up the road. For me. How perfectly charming. Bayaz took the flowers from her. Bayaz took the flowers from her. Excellent work, my dear. The master maker himself could not have done better. The rider clattered out into the yard, pulled his horse up savagely and swung from the saddle. Calder. The years had been kinder to him than to Logen. That much was clear. He was dressed all in fine blacks trimmed with dark fur. A big red jewel flashed on his finger. The hilt of his sword was set with gold. He'd grown and filled out, half the size of his brother's scale, but a big man still. His pale, proud face was pretty much as Logen remembered, though, thin lips twisted in a permanent sneer. He threw his reins at the woman churning milk, then strode briskly across the yard, glowering about him, his long hair flapping in the breeze. When he was about 10 strides away, he saw Logen. His jaw dropped. Calder took a shocked half-step back and his hand twitched towards his sword. Then he smiled, a cold little smile. "So you've taken to keeping dogs, have you, Bayaz? I'd watch this one. He's been known to bite his master's hand." His lip curled further. "I could put him down for you if you'd like." Logen shrugged. Hard words are for fools and cowards. Calder might have been both, but Logen was neither. If you mean to kill, you're better getting right to it than talking about it. Talk only makes the other man ready, and that's the last thing you want. So Logen said nothing. Calder could take that for weakness if he pleased, and so much the better. Fights might find Logen depressingly often, but he was long past looking for them. Bethad's second son turned his contempt on the first of the Magi. "My father will be displeased, Bayaz, that my men must wait outside the gate shows little respect. But I have so little, Prince Calder," said the wizard calmly. "Please don't be downhearted, though. Your last messenger wasn't allowed over the bridge, so you see we're making progress." Calder scowled. "Why have you not answered my father's summons? There are so many demands on my time." Bayaz held up the chain of flowers. "These don't make themselves, you know." The prince was not amused. "My father," he boomed. "Bethad, king of the Northmen, commands you to attend upon him at Carlion." He cleared his throat. "He will not He coughed. "What?" demanded Bayaz. "Speak up, child. He commands." The prince coughed again, spluttered, choked. He put a hand to his throat. The air seemed to have become very still. "Commands, does he?" Bayaz frowned. "Bring great Juvens back from the land of the dead. He may command me. He alone, and no other." The frown grew deeper still, and Logen had to resist a strange desire to back away. "You may not, nor may your father, whatever he calls himself." Calder sank slowly to his knees, face twisted, eyes watering. Bayaz looked him up and down. "What solemn attire. Did somebody die?" "Here." And he tossed the chain of flowers over the prince's head. "A little color may lighten your mood. Tell your father he must come himself. I do not waste my time on fools and younger sons. I am old-fashioned in this. I like to talk to the horse's head, not the horse arse. Do you understand me, boy?" Calder was sagging sideways, eyes red and bulging. The first of the Magi waved his hand. "You may go." The prince heaved in a ragged breath, coughed and reeled to his feet, stumbled for his horse and hauled himself up into the saddle with a deal less grace than he had got down. He shot a murderous glance over his shoulder as he made for the gate, but it didn't have quite the same weight with his face red as a slapped arse. Logen realized he was grinning, wide. It was a long time since he'd enjoyed himself this much. "I understand that you can speak to the spirits." Logen was caught off guard. To speak to the spirits?" Bayaz shook his head. "It is a rare gift in these times. How are they?" "What, the spirits? Yes, dwindling. Soon they will all sleep, eh? The magic leaks out of the world. That is the set order of things. Over the years my knowledge has grown, and yet my power has diminished." Calder seemed impressed. "Bah," Bayaz waved his hand. "And a mere nothing. A little trick of air and flesh, easily done. No, believe me, the magic ebbs away. It is a fact, a natural law. Still, there are many ways to crack an egg, my friend? If one tool fails, then we must try another." Logen was no longer entirely sure what they were talking about, but he was too tired to ask. "Yes, indeed," murmured the first of the Magi. "There are many ways to crack an egg. Speaking of which, you look hungry." Logen's mouth flooded with spit at the very mention of food. "Yes," he mumbled. "Yes, I could eat, of course." Bayaz clapped him warmly on the shoulder. "And then perhaps a bath? Not that we are offended, of course. But I find that there is nothing more soothing than hot water after a long walk, and you, I suspect, have had a very long walk indeed. Come with me, Master Ninefingers. You're safe here. Food, bath, safety. Logen had to stop himself from weeping as he followed the old man into the library. Chapter 5. The good man. It was a hot, hot day outside, and the sun shone brightly through the many-paned windows, casting criss-cross patterns on the wooden floor of the audience chamber. It was mid-afternoon, and the room was soupy, warm and stuffy as a kitchen. Fortes Dan Hoff, the Lord Chamberlain, was red-faced and sweaty in his fur-trimmed robes of state, and had been in an increasingly filthy mood all afternoon. Harlan Morrow, his under-secretary for audiences, looked even more uncomfortable, but then he had his terror of Hoff to contend with, in addition to the heat. Both men seemed greatly distressed in their own ways, but at least they got to sit down. Major West was sweating steadily into his embroidered dress uniform. He had been standing in the same position, hands behind his back, teeth gritted, for nearly 2 hours, while Lord Hoff sulked and grumbled and bellowed his way through the applicants and anyone else in view. West fervently wished, and not for the first time that afternoon, that he was lying under a tree in the park with a strong drink, or perhaps under a glacier, entombed within the ice. Anywhere but here. Standing guard on these horrible audiences was hardly one of West's more pleasant duties, but it could have been worse. You had to spare a thought for the 8 soldiers stood around the walls. They were in full armor. West was waiting for one of them to pass out and crash to the floor with a sound like a cupboard full of saucepans, no doubt to the great disgust of the Lord Chamberlain. But so far they were all somehow staying upright. Why is this damned room always the wrong temperature? Hoff was demanding to know, as if the heat was an insult directed solely at him. It's too hot half the year, too cold the other half. There is no air in here, no air at all. Why don't these windows open? Why can't we have a bigger room? Air, mumbled the harassed undersecretary, pushing his spectacles up his sweaty nose. Requests for audiences have always been held here, my Lord Chamberlain. He paused under the fearsome gaze of his superior. It is traditional? I know that, you dolt, thundered Hoff, face crimson with heat and fury. Who asked for your damn fool of an opinion, anyway? Yes, that is to say no, stuttered Morrow. That is to say, quite so, my lord. Hoff shook his head with a mighty frown, staring around the room in search of something else to displease him. How many more must we endure today? 4 more, your grace. Damn it, thundered the chamberlain, shifting in his huge chair and flapping his fur-trimmed collar to let some air in. This is intolerable. West found himself in silent agreement. Hoff snatched up a silver goblet from the table and took a great slurp of wine. He was a great one for drinking. Indeed, he had been drinking all afternoon. It had not improved his temper. Who's the next fool? He demanded. Morrow squinted at a large document through his spectacles, tracing across the crabby writing with an inky finger. Goodman Heath is next. A farmer from a farmer? A farmer, did you say? So we must sit in this ridiculous heat, listening to some damn commoner moan on about how the weather has affected his sheep? Well, my lord, muttered Morrow, it does seem as though Goodman Heath has a legitimate grievance against his landlord, and damn it all, I am sick to my stomach of other people's grievances. The Lord Chamberlain took another swallow of wine. Show the idiot in. The doors were opened, and Goodman Heath was allowed into their presence. To underline the balance of power within the room, the Lord Chamberlain's table was raised up on a high dais, so that even standing the poor man had to look up at them. An honest face, but very gaunt. He held a battered hat before him in trembling hands. West shrugged his shoulders in discomfort as a drop of sweat ran down his back. You are Goodman Heath, correct? Yes, my lord, mumbled the peasant in a broad accent. From Hoff cut him off with consummate rudeness. And you come before us seeking an audience with his august majesty, the High King of the Union. Goodman Heath licked his lips. West wondered how far he had come to be made a fool of. A very long way, most likely. My family have been put off our land. The landlord said we had not been paying the rent, but the Lord Chamberlain waved a hand. Plainly, this is a matter for the Commission for Land and Agriculture. His August Majesty the King is concerned with the welfare of all his subjects, No matter how mean, West almost winced at this slight, but he cannot be expected to give personal attention to every trifling thing. His time is valuable, and so is mine. Good day, and that was it. Two of the soldiers pulled the double doors open for Goodman Heath to leave. The peasant's face had gone very pale, his knuckles ringing at the brim of his hat. "Good, my lord," he stammered. "I've already been to the commission." Hoff looked up sharply, making the farmer stammer to a halt. "Good day," I said. The peasant's shoulders slumped. He took a last look around the room. Morrow was examining something on the far wall with great interest and refused to meet his eye. The Lord Chamberlain stared back at him angrily, infuriated by this unforgivable waste of his time. West felt sick to be a part of it. Heath turned and shuffled away, head bowed. The doors swung shut. Hoff bashed his fist on the table. "Did you see that?" He stared round fiercely at the sweating assembly. "The sheer gall of the man. Did you see that, Major West?" "Yes, my Lord Chamberlain, I saw it all," said West stiffly. "It was a disgrace." Fortunately, Hoff did not take his whole meaning. "A disgrace, Major West. You are quite right. Why the hell is it that all the promising young men go into the army? I want to know who is responsible for letting these beggars in here." He glared at the undersecretary, who swallowed and stared at his documents. "What's next?" Mumbled Morrow. "Coster Dan Kaut, Magister of the Guild of Mercers." "I know who he is, damn it," snapped Hoff, wiping a fresh sheen of sweat from his face. "If it isn't the damn peasants, it's the damn merchants!" He roared at the soldiers by the door, his voice easily loud enough to be heard in the corridor outside. "Show the grubbing old swindler in, then." Magister Kaut could hardly have presented a more different appearance from the previous supplicant. He was a big, plump man, with a face as soft as his eyes were hard. His purple vesture of office was embroidered with yards of golden thread, so ostentatious that the Emperor of Gurkul himself might have been embarrassed to wear it. He was accompanied by a pair of senior mercers, their own attire scarcely less magnificent. West wondered if Goodman Heath could earn enough in 10 years to pay for one of those gowns. He decided not, even if he hadn't been thrown off his land. "My Lord Chamberlain," intoned Kaut with an elaborate bow. Hoff acknowledged the head of the Guild of Mercers as faintly as humanly possible, with a raised eyebrow and an almost imperceptible twist of the lip. Kaut waited for a greeting which he felt more befitting of his station, but none was forthcoming. He noisily cleared his throat. "I have come to seek an audience with His August Majesty the Lord Chamberlain," snorted. "The purpose of this session is to decide who is worthy of His Majesty's attention. If you aren't seeking an audience with him, you have blundered into the wrong room." It was already clear that this interview would be every bit as unsuccessful as the last. There was a kind of horrible justice to it, West supposed. The great and the small were treated exactly alike. Magister Kault's eyes narrowed slightly, but he continued. "The Honorable Guild of Mercers, of whom I am the humble representative," Hoff slurped wine noisily, and Kault was obliged to pause for a moment, "have been the victims of a most malicious and mischievous attack." "Fill this up, would you?" yelled the Lord Chamberlain, waving his empty goblet at Morrow. The undersecretary slipped eagerly from his chair and seized the decanter. Kault was forced to wait, teeth gritted, while the wine gurgled out. "Continue," blustered Hoff, waving his hand. "We don't have all day." "A most malicious and underhanded attack," the Lord Chamberlain squinted down. "An attack, you say? A common assault is a matter for the city watch." Magister Kault grimaced. He and his two companions were already starting to sweat. "Not an attack of that variety, my Lord Chamberlain, but an insidious and underhanded assault, designed to discredit the shining reputation of our guild and to damage our business interests in the free cities of Styria and across the Union. An attack perpetrated by certain deceitful elements of His Majesty's Inquisition, and I have heard enough." The Lord Chamberlain jerked up his big hand for silence. "If this is a matter of trade, then it should be handled by His Majesty's Commission for Trade and Commerce." Hoff spoke slowly and precisely, in the manner of a schoolmaster addressing his most disappointing pupil. "If this is a matter of law, then it should be handled by the Department of High Justice Moravia. If it is a matter of the internal workings of His Majesty's Inquisition, then you must arrange an appointment with Archlector Sult. In any case, it is hardly a matter for the attention of His August Majesty." The head of the Mercers' Guild opened his mouth, but the Lord Chamberlain spoke over him. voice louder than ever. Your king employs a commission, selects a high justice, and appoints an archlector, so that he need not deal with every trifling issue himself. Incidentally, that is also why he grants licenses to certain merchant guilds, and not to line the pockets. And his lip twisted into an unpleasant sneer. Of the trading class. Good day. And the doors were opened. Colt's face had turned pale with anger at that last comment. You may depend upon it, Lord Chamberlain, he said coldly, that we will seek redress elsewhere, and with the very greatest of persistence. Hoff glared back at him for a very long while. Seek it wherever you like, he growled, and with as much persistence as you please. But not here. Good day. If you could have stabbed someone in the face with the phrase, good day, the head of the Guild of Mercers would have lain dead on the floor. Colt blinked a couple of times, then turned angrily and strode out with as much dignity as he could muster. His two lackeys followed close on his heels, their fabulous gowns flapping behind them. The doors were pushed shut. Hoff smashed the table once again with his fist. An outrage, he spluttered. Those arrogant swine. Do they seriously think they can flout the king's law and still seek the king's help when things turn sour? Well, no, said Morrow. Of course. The Lord Chamberlain ignored his undersecretary and turned to West with a sneering smile. Still, I fancy I could see the vultures circling around them, despite the low ceiling. Eh, Major West? Indeed, my Lord Chamberlain, mumbled West, thoroughly uncomfortable and wishing this torture would end. Then he could get back to his sister. His heart sank. She was even more of a handful than he remembered. She was clever all right, but he worried that she might be too clever for her own good. If only she would just marry some honest man and be happy. His position here was precarious enough, without her making a spectacle of herself. Vultures, vultures, Hoff was murmuring to himself. Nasty-looking birds, but they have their uses. What's next? The sweating undersecretary looked even more uncomfortable than before as he fumbled for the right words. We'll have a party of diplomats. The Lord Chamberlain paused, goblet halfway to his mouth. Diplomats? From whom? From this so-called king of the Northmen, Bethard. Hoff burst out laughing. Diplomats? He cackled, mopping his face on his sleeve. Savages, you mean? The undersecretary chuckled unconvincingly. Ah, yes, my lord, ha-ha. Savages, of course. But dangerous. Eh, Morrow, snapped the Lord Chamberlain, his good humor evaporating instantly. The undersecretary's cackling gurgled to a halt. Very dangerous. We must be careful. Show them in. There were 4 of them. The 2 smallest were great big, fierce-looking men, scarred and bearded, clad in heavy, battered armor. They had been disarmed at the gate of the Agrient, of course, but there was still a sense of danger about them, and West had the feeling that they would have given up a lot of big, well-worn weapons. These were the sort of men who were crowded on the borders of England, hungry for war, not far from West's home. With them came an older man also in pitted armor, and with long hair and a great white beard. There was a livid scar across his face and through his eye, which was blind white. He had a broad smile on his lips, though, and his pleasant demeanor was greatly at odds with that of his 2 dour companions, and with the 4th man, who came behind. He had to stoop to get under the lintel, which was a good 7 feet above the floor. He was swathed and hooded in a rough brown cloak, features invisible. As he straightened up, towering over everyone else, the room began to seem absurdly cramped. His sheer bulk was intimidating, but there was something more. Something that seemed to come off him in sickly waves. The soldiers around the walls felt it, and they shifted uncomfortably. The undersecretary for audiences felt it, sweating and twitching and fussing with his documents. Major West certainly felt it. His skin had gone cold despite the heat, and he could feel every hair on his body standing up under his damp uniform. Only Hoff seemed unaffected. He looked the 4 Northmen up and down with a deep frown on his face, no more impressed with the hooded giant than he had been with Goodman Heath. So you are messengers from Bethard. He rolled the words around in his mouth, then spat them out. The king of the Northmen. We are, said the smiling old man, bowing with great reverence. I am White-Eye Hansel. His voice was rich, round and pleasant, without any accent, not at all what West had been expecting. "And you are Bethod's emissary?" asked Hoff casually, taking another swallow of wine from his goblet. For the first time ever, West was pleased the Lord Chamberlain was in the room with him. But then he glanced up at the hooded man, and the feeling of unease returned. "Oh, no," said White-Eye. "I am here merely as translator. This is the emissary of the King of the Northmen," and his good eye flicked nervously up to the dark figure in the cloak, as though even he was afraid. "Fenris." He stretched out the ears on the end of the name so that it hissed in the air. Fenris the Feared. An apt name indeed. Major West thought back to songs he had heard in his childhood, stories of bloodthirsty giants in the mountains of the distant north. The room was silent for a moment. "Humph," said the Lord Chamberlain, unmoved. "And you seek an audience with His August Majesty, the High King of the Union?" "We do indeed, my Lord Chamberlain," said the old warrior. "Our master, Bethod, greatly regrets the hostility between our two nations. He wishes only to be on the best of terms with his southern neighbors. We bring an offer of peace from my king to yours, and a gift to show our good faith. Nothing more." "Well, well," said Hoff, sitting back in his high chair with a broad smile. "A gracious request, graciously made. You may see the king in open council tomorrow, and present your offer and your gift before the foremost peers of the realm." White-Eye bowed respectfully. "You are most kind, my Lord Chamberlain." He turned for the door, followed by the two dour warriors. The cloaked figure lingered for a moment. Then he too slowly turned and stooped through the doorway. It wasn't until the doors were shut that West could breathe easily again. He shook his head and shrugged his sweaty shoulders. Songs about giants indeed. A great big man in a cloak was all. But looking again, that doorway really was very high. "There, you see, Master Morrow?" Hoff looked intensely pleased with himself. "Hardly the savages you led me to expect. I feel we are close to a resolution of our northern problems, don't you?" The Undersecretary did not look in the least convinced. Yes, my lord, of course. Yes, indeed. A lot of fuss over nothing. A lot of pessimistic, defeatist nonsense from our jumpy citizens up north, eh? War? Bah, Hoff whacked his hand on the table again, making wine slop out of his goblet and spatter on the wood. These Northmen wouldn't dare. Why, next thing you know they'll be petitioning us for membership of the Union. You see if I'm not right, eh, Major West? Good. Excellent. We've got something done today at least. One more, and we can get out of this damn furnace. Who do we have, Morrow? The Undersecretary frowned and pushed his glasses up his nose. We have one Uru Sulfur. He wrestled with the unfamiliar name. We have a who, or a sulfur or something. Never heard of him, grunted the Lord Chamberlain. What manner of a man is he? Some kind of a southerner? Not another peasant, please? The Undersecretary examined his notes and swallowed. An emissary? Yes, but from whom? Morrow was positively cringing, like a child expecting a slap. From the Great Order of Magi, he blurted out. There was a moment of stunned silence. West's eyebrows went up and his jaw came open, and he guessed that the same was happening unseen behind the visors of the soldiers. He winced instinctively as he anticipated the response of the Lord Chamberlain, but Hoff surprised them all by bursting into peals of laughter. Excellent. At last some entertainment. It's been years since we had a magus here. Show in the wizard. We mustn't keep him waiting. Yoru Sulfur was something of a disappointment. He had simple, travel-stained clothes, was scarcely better dressed than Goodman Heath had been, in fact. His staff was not shod with gold, had no lump of shining crystal on the end. His eye did not flash with a mysterious fire. He looked a fairly ordinary sort of a man in his middle 30s, slightly tired, as though after a long journey, but otherwise well at his ease before the Lord Chamberlain. A good day to you, gentlemen, he said, leaning on his staff. West was having some difficulty working out where he was from. Not the Union, because his skin was too dark, and not Gurkhul or the far south, because his skin was too light. Not from the north or from Styria. Further then, but where? Now that West looked at him more closely, he noticed that his eyes were different colors. One blue, one green. And a good day to you, sir, said Hoff, smiling as though he really meant it. My door is forever open to the Great Order of Magi. Tell me, do I have the pleasure of addressing Great Beaz himself? Sulfur looked puzzled. No, was I wrongly announced. I am Yoru Sulfur. Master Baez is a bald gentleman. He pushed a hand through his own head of curly brown hair. There is a statue of him outside in the avenue, but I did have the honor to study under him for several years. He is a most powerful and knowledgeable master. Of course he is. And how may we be of service? Yoru Sulfur cleared his throat, as though to tell a story. On the death of King Herod the Great, Baez, the first of the Magi, left the Union. But he swore an oath to return. Yes, that's true, chuckled Hoff. Very true, every schoolchild knows it. And he pronounced that when he returned, his coming would be heralded by another. True also, well said Sulfur, smiling broadly. Here I am, the Lord Chamberlain roared with laughter. Here you are, he shouted, thumping the table. Harlan Morrow allowed himself a little chuckle, but shut up immediately as Hoff's smile began to fade. During my tenure as Lord Chamberlain, I have had 3 members of the Great Order of Magi apply to me for audiences with the king. 2 were most clearly insane, and 1 was an exceptionally courageous swindler. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table and steepling his fingers before him. Tell me, Master Sulfur, which kind of magus are you? I'm neither of those. I see. Then you will have documents, of course. Sulfur reached into his coat and brought out a small letter, closed with a white seal, a single strange symbol stamped into it. He placed it carelessly on the table before the Lord Chamberlain. Hoff frowned. He picked up the document and turned it over in his hands. He examined the seal carefully. Then he dabbed his face with his sleeve, broke the wax, unfolded the thick paper, and began to read. Yoru Sulfur showed no sign of nerves. He didn't appear troubled by the heat. He strolled around the room. He nodded to the armored soldiers. He didn't seem upset by their lack of response. He turned suddenly to West. It's terribly hot in here, isn't it? It's a wonder these poor fellows don't pass out and crash to the floor with a sound like a cupboard full of saucepans. The Lord Chamberlain put the letter down carefully on the table, no longer in the least amused. It occurs to me that the open council would be the wrong place to discuss this matter. I agree. I was hoping for a private audience with Lord Chancellor Ficht. I am afraid that will not be possible. Hoff licked his lips. Lord Ficht is dead. Sulfur frowned. That is most unfortunate. Indeed, we all feel his loss most keenly. Perhaps I and certain other members of the closed council can assist you. Sulfur bowed his head. I am guided by you, my Lord Chamberlain. I will try to arrange something for later this evening. Until then we will find you some lodgings within the Agrient, suitable for your station. He signaled to the guards, and the doors were opened. Thank you so much, Lord Hoff. Master Morrow, Major West. Sulfur nodded to them graciously, each in turn, and then turned and left. The doors were closed once more, leaving West wondering how the man had known his name. Hoff turned to his Undersecretary for Audiences. Go immediately to Arch-Lector Sult, and tell him we must meet at once. Then fetch High Justice Morovia and Lord Marshal Varas. Tell them it is a matter of the very highest importance, and not a word of this to anyone beyond those 3. He shook his finger in Morrow's sweaty face. Not a word. The Undersecretary stared back, spectacles askew. Now, roared Hoff. Morrow leapt to his feet, stumbled on the hem of his gown, then hurried out through a side door. West swallowed, his mouth very dry. Hoff stared long and hard at each man in the room. As for the rest of you, not a word to anyone about any of this, or the consequences for all of you will be most severe. Now out, everyone out. The soldiers clanked from the room immediately. West needed no further encouragement, and he hurried after them, leaving the brooding Lord Chamberlain alone in his high chair. West's thoughts were dark and confused as he pulled the door shut behind him. Fragments of old stories of the Magi, fears about war in the north, images of a hooded giant towering up near the ceiling. There had been some strange and some sinister visitors to the Agrient that day, and he felt quite weighed down by worries. He tried to shrug them off, told himself it was all foolishness, but then all he could think of was his sister, cavorting about the Agrient like a fool. He groaned to himself. She was probably with Luthar right now. Why the hell had he introduced the 2 of them? For some reason he had been expecting the same awkward, sickly, sharp-tongued girl he remembered from years ago. He had got quite a shock when this woman had turned up at his quarters. He had barely recognized her. Undoubtedly a woman, and a fine-looking one too. Meanwhile, Luthar was arrogant and rich and handsome, and had all the self-restraint of a 6-year-old. He knew they had seen each other since, and more than once. Just as friends, of course. RD had no other friends here. Just friends. Shit, he cursed. It was like putting a cat by the cream and trusting it not to stick its tongue in. Why the hell hadn't he thought it through? It was a damn disaster in the making. But what could he do about it now? He stared off miserably down the hallway. There's nothing like seeing another's misery to make you forget your own. And Goodman Heath was a sorry sight indeed. He was sitting alone on a long bench, face deathly pale, staring off into space. He must have been sitting there all this time, while the Mercers and the Northmen and the Magus came and went, waiting for nothing but with nowhere left to go. West glanced up and down the hallway. There was no one else nearby. Heath was oblivious to him, mouth open, eyes glassy, battered hat forgotten on his knees. West couldn't simply leave the man like this. He didn't have it in him. "Goodman Heath," he said as he approached, and the peasant looked up at him, surprised. He fumbled for his hat and made to rise, muttering apologies. "No, please, don't get up." West sat down on the bench. He stared at his feet, unable to look the man in the eye. There was an awkward silence. "I have a friend who sits on the Commission for Land and Agriculture. There might be something he can do for you." He trailed off, embarrassed, squinting up the corridor. The farmer gave a sad smile. "I'd be right grateful for anything you could do." Yes, of course, I'll do what I can." It would do no good whatsoever, and they both knew it. West grimaced and bit his lip. "You'd better take this," and he pressed his purse into the peasant's limp, calloused fingers. Heath looked at him, mouth slightly open. West gave a quick, awkward smile, then got to his feet. He was very keen to be off. "Sir," called Goodman Heath after him, but West was already hurrying down the corridor, and he didn't look back. Chapter 6. On the list, Why Do I Do This? The outline of Willem Dan Rob's townhouse was cut out in black against the clear night sky. It was an unremarkable building, a 2-story dwelling with a low wall and a gate in front, just like 100 others in this street. Our old friend Ruse used to live in a palatial great villa near the market. Rob really should have asked him for some more ambitious bribes. Still, lucky for us he didn't. Elsewhere in the city, the fashionable avenues would be brightly lit and busy with drunken revelers right through until dawn. But this secluded side street was far from the bright lights and the prying eyes. We can work undisturbed. Round the side of the building on the upper floor, a lamp was burning in a narrow window. He turned to Practical Frost and pointed down the side of the house. The albino nodded and slipped away silently across the street. Glokta waited for him to reach the wall and disappear into the shadows beside the building. Then he turned to Severard and pointed at the front door. The eyes of the lanky Practical smiled at him for a moment. Then he scuttled quickly away, staying low, rolled over the low wall, and dropped without a sound onto the other side. Perfect so far, but now I must move. Glokta wondered why he had come. Frost and Severard were more than capable of dealing with Rob by themselves, and he would only slow them down. I might even fall on my arse and alert the idiot to our presence. So why did I come? But Glokta knew why. The feeling of excitement was already building in his throat. It felt almost like being alive. He had muffled the end of his cane with a bit of rag, so he was able to limp to the wall, ever so delicately, without making too much noise. By that time, Severard had swung the gate open, holding the hinge with one gloved hand so that it didn't make a noise. Nice and neat. That little wall might as well be 100 feet high for all my chances of getting over it. Severard was kneeling on the step against the front door, picking the lock. His ear was close to the wood, his eyes squinting with concentration, gloved hands moving deftly. Glokta's heart was beating fast, his skin prickly with tension. Ah, the thrill of the hunt. There was a soft click, then another. Severard slipped his glittering picks into a pocket, then reached out and slowly, carefully turned the doorknob. The door swung silently open. What a useful fellow he is. Without him and Frost, I am just a cripple. They are my hands, my arms, my legs, but I am their brains. Severard slipped inside and Glokta followed him, wincing with pain every time he put his weight on his left leg. The hallway was dark, but there was a shaft of light spilling down the stairs from above, and the banisters cast strange, distorted shadows on the wooden floor. Glokta pointed up the steps, and Severard nodded and began to tiptoe toward them, keeping his feet close to the wall. It seemed to take him an age to get there. The third step made a quiet creaking sound as he put his weight on it. Glokta winced. Severard froze in place. They waited, still as statues. There was no sound from upstairs. Glokta began to breathe again. Severard moved ever so slowly upwards, step by gentle step. As he got towards the top, he peered cautiously round the corner, back pressed against the wall. Then he took the last step and disappeared from view without a sound. Practical Frost emerged from the shadows at the far end of the corridor. Glokta raised an eyebrow at him, but he shook his head. Nobody downstairs. He turned to the front door and started to close it, ever so gently. Only when it was shut did he slowly release the doorknob, so the latch slid silently into place. You want to see this? Glokta gave a start at the sudden sound, turning round quickly and causing a jolt of pain to shoot through his back. Severard was standing, hands on hips, at the head of the stairs. He turned and made off towards the light, and Frost bounded up the steps after him, no longer making any pretense at stealth. Why can no one ever stay on the ground floor, always upstairs? At least he didn't have to try to be quiet as he struggled up the steps after his practicals, right foot creaking, left foot scraping on the boards. Bright lamplight was flooding out into the upstairs corridor from an open door at the far end, and Glokta limped toward it. He paused as he crossed the threshold, catching his breath after the climb. Oh dear me, what a mess! A big bookcase had been torn away from the wall, and books were scattered, open and closed, all about the floor. A glass of wine had been knocked over on the desk, making sodden red rags of the crumpled papers strewn across it. The bed was in disarray, the covers pulled half off, the pillows and the mattress slashed and spilling feathers. A wardrobe had its doors open, one of them dangling half off. A few tattered garments were hanging inside, but most were lying torn in a heap below. A handsome young man lay on his back under the window, staring up, pale-faced and open-mouthed at the ceiling. It would have been an understatement to say that his throat had been cut. It had been hacked so savagely that his head was only just still attached. There was blood splattered everywhere, on the torn clothes, on the slashed mattress, all over the body itself. There were a couple of smeared, bloody palm prints on the wall, a great pool of blood across a good part of the floor still wet. He was killed tonight, perhaps only a few hours ago, perhaps only a few minutes. I don't think he'll be answering our questions, said Severard. No, Glokta's eyes drifted over the wreckage. I think he might be dead. But how did it happen? Frost fixed him with a pink eye and raised a white eyebrow. Poison? Severard spluttered with shrill laughter under his mask. Even Glokta allowed himself a chuckle. Clearly. But how did our poison get in? Open wyo, mumbled Frost, pointing at the floor. Glokta limped into the room, careful not to let his feet or his cane touch the sticky mess of blood and feathers. So, our poison saw the lamp burning just as we did. He entered via the downstairs window. He climbed silently up the stairs. Glokta turned the corpse hands over with the tip of his cane. A few specks of blood from the neck, but no damage to the knuckles or the fingers. He did not struggle. He was taken by surprise. He craned forward and peered at the gaping wound. A single, powerful cut, probably with a knife. And Willem Dan Robb has sprung a most serious leak, said Severard. And we are short one informant, mused Glokta. There had been no blood in the corridor. Our man took pains not to get his feet wet while searching the room, however messy it may look. He was not angry or afraid. It was just a job. The killer was a professional, murmured Glokta. He came here with murder in mind. Then perhaps he made this little effort to give the appearance of a burglary, who can say. Either way, the Archlector won't be satisfied with a corpse. He looked up at his two practicals. Who's next on the list? This time, there had been a struggle, without a doubt. If a one-sided one. Solomon Scandi was sprawled on his side, facing the wall, as though embarrassed by the state of his slashed and tattered nightshirt. There were deep cuts in his forearms, where he struggled vainly to ward off the blade. He had crawled across the floor, leaving a bloody trail across the highly polished wood. Where he struggled vainly to get away, he had failed. The 4 gaping knife wounds in his back had been the end of him. Glokta felt his face twitching as he looked down at the bloody corpse. One body might just be a coincidence. 2 make a conspiracy. His eyelid fluttered. Whoever did this knew we were coming, and when, and precisely who for. They are one step ahead of us. More than likely, our list of accomplices has already become a list of corpses. There was a creaking sound behind Glokta, and his head whipped round, sending shooting pains down his stiff neck. Nothing but the open window swinging in the breeze. Calm, now, calm, and think it out. It would seem the Honorable Guild of Mercers have been doing a little housekeeping. How could they know? Muttered Severard. How indeed? They must have seen Rue's list, or been told who was on it. And that means— Glokta licked at his empty gums. Someone inside the Inquisition has been talking. For once, Severard's eyes were not smiling. If they know who's on the list, they know who wrote it, they know who we are. 3 more names on the list, perhaps. Down at the bottom, Glokta grinned. How very exciting. You scared? I'm not happy, I'll tell you that. He nodded down at the corpse. A knife in the back isn't part of my plan. Nor mine, Severard, believe me. No, indeed. If I die, I'll never know who betrayed us. And I want to know. A bright, cloudless spring day, and the park was busy with fops and idlers of every variety. Glokta sat very still on his bench, in the merciful shade of a spreading tree, and stared out at the shimmering greenery, the sparkling water, the happy, the drunken, the colorful revelers. There were people wedged together on the benches around the lake, pairs and groups scattered around the grass, drinking and talking, basking in the sun. There seemed no space for any more, but no one came and sat next to Glokta. Occasionally somebody would hurry up, hardly able to believe their luck in finding such a spot. Then they would see him sitting there. Their faces would fall and they would swerve away, or walk right past as though they had never meant to sit. I'd drive them away as surely as the plague, but perhaps that's just as well. I don't need their company. He watched a group of young soldiers rowing a boat on the lake. One of them stood up, wobbling around, holding forth with a bottle in his hand. The boat rocked alarmingly, and his companions shouted at him to get down. Vague gales of good-natured laughter came wafting through the air, delayed a little by the distance. Children. How young they look. How innocent. And such was I, not long ago. It seems 1,000 years, though. Longer. It seems a different world. Glokta. He looked up, shading his eyes with his hand. It was Arch-Lector Sult, arrived at last, a tall, dark shape against the blue sky. Glokta thought he looked a little more tired, more lined, more drawn than usual as he stared coldly down. This had better be interesting. Sult flicked out the tails of his long white coat and lowered himself gracefully onto the bench. The commoners are up in arms again near Keln. Some idiot of a landowner hangs a few peasants and now we have a mess to deal with. How hard can it be to manage a field full of dirt and a couple of farmers? You don't have to treat them well, just as long as you don't hang them. His mouth was a straight, hard line as he glared out across the lawns. This had better be damned interesting. Then he'll try not to disappoint you. Willem Dan Rob is dead. As though to add emphasis to Glokta's statement, the drunken soldier slipped and toppled over the side of the boat, splashing into the water. His friend's screams of laughter reached Glokta a moment later. He was murdered. Huh? It happens? Pick up the next man on the list. Sult got to his feet, frowning. I didn't think you'd need my approval for every little thing. That's why I picked you for this job. Just get on with it. He snapped as he turned away. There's no need to rush, Arch-Lector. That's the trouble with good legs. You tend to run around too much. If you have trouble moving, on the other hand, you don't move until you damn well know it's time. The next man on the list also suffered a mishap. Sult turned back, one eyebrow slightly raised. He did? They all did. The Arch-Lector pursed his lips, sat back down on the bench. All of them? All of them? Mused Sult. That is interesting. The Mercers are cleaning up, are they? I hardly expected such ruthlessness. Times have changed, all right. Times have certainly... He trailed off, slowly starting to frown. You think someone gave them Rue's list, aren't you? You think one of ours has been talking. That's why you asked me to come here, isn't it? Did you think I was just avoiding the stairs? Each one of them killed? Each and every name on our list? The very night we go to arrest them? I am not a great believer in coincidences. Are you, Arch-Lector? He was evidently not. His face had turned very grim. Who saw the confession? Nay, And my 2 practicals, of course. You have absolute confidence in them. Absolute. There was a pause. The boat was drifting, rudderless, as the soldiers scrambled about, oars sticking up in the air, the man in the water splashing and laughing, spraying water over his friends. The confession was in my office for some time, murmured the Archlector. Some members of my staff could have seen it. You have absolute confidence in them, Your Eminence? Salt stared at Glokta for a long, icy moment. They wouldn't dare. They know me better than that. Fat leaves superior, Kaline, said Glokta quietly. The Archlector's lips hardly moved as he spoke. You must tread carefully, Inquisitor, very carefully. The ground is not at all safe where you are walking. Fools do not become superiors of the Inquisition, despite appearances. Kaline has many friends, both within the House of Questions and outside it. Powerful friends. Any accusation against him must be backed up by the very strongest of proof. Zult stopped suddenly, waiting for a small group of ladies to pass out of earshot. The very strongest of proof, he hissed, once they had moved away. You must find me this assassin. Easier said than done, of course, Your Eminence. But my investigation has reached something of a dead end. Not quite. We still have 1 card left to play. Roos himself. Roos? But, Archlector, he will be in England by now. Sweating down a mine or some such, if he has even lasted this long. No, he is here in the Agrient, under lock and key. I thought it best to hold on to him. Glokta did his utmost to contain his surprise. Clever. Very clever. Fools do not become Archlectors either, it seems. Roos will be your bait. I will have my secretary carry a message to Kaline, letting him know that I have relented, that I am prepared to let the Mercers continue to operate, but under tighter control, that as a gesture of goodwill I have let Roos go. If Kaline is the source of our leak, I dare say he will let the Mercers know that Roos is free. I dare say they will send this assassin to punish him for his loose tongue. I dare say you could take him while he is trying. If the killer doesn't come, well, we might have to look for our traitor elsewhere. And we have lost nothing. An excellent plan, Your Eminence. Salt stared at him coldly. Of course, you will need somewhere to operate, somewhere far from the House of Questions. I will make the funds available, have Roos delivered to your practicals, and let you know when Kaline has the information. Find me this assassin, Glokta, and squeeze him. Squeeze him until the pips squeak. The boat lurched wildly as the soldiers tried to haul their wet companion in. Then it suddenly turned right over, dumping them all into the water. I want names, hissed Salt, glowering at the splashing soldiers. I want names and evidence and documents and people who will stand up in open council and point fingers. He stood up smoothly from the bench. Keep me informed. He strode off towards the House of Questions, feet crunching on the gravel of the path, and Glokta watched him go. An excellent plan. I'm glad you're on my side, Archlector. You are on my side, aren't you? The soldiers had succeeded in hauling the upended boat onto the bank and were standing, dripping wet, shouting at one another. No longer so good-humored. One of the oars was still floating, abandoned in the water, drifting gradually towards the point where the stream flowed from the lake. Soon it would pass under the bridge and be carried out, beneath the great walls of the Agrient and into the moat. Glokta watched it turning slowly round in the water. A mistake. One should attend to the details. It is easy to forget the little things, but without the oar, the boat is useless. He let his gaze wander across some of the other faces in the park. His eye alighted on a handsome pair sitting on a bench by the lake. The young man was speaking quietly to the girl, a sad and earnest expression on his face. She got up quickly, moving away from him with her hands over her face. Ah, the pain of the jilted lover. The loss, the anger, the shame. It seems as though you'll never recover. What poet was it who wrote there's no pain worse than the pain of a broken heart? Sentimental shit. He should have spent more time in the Emperor's prisons. He smiled, opening his mouth and licking the empty gums where his front teeth used to be. Broken hearts heal with time, but broken teeth never do. Glokta looked at the young man. He had an expression of slight amusement on his face as he watched the weeping girl walk away. "The young bastard! I wonder if he's broken as many hearts as I did, in my youth. It hardly seems possible now. It takes me half an hour just to pluck up the courage to stand. The only women I've made cry lately have been the wives of those I've had exiled to Anglin's sand." Glokta turned around. "Lord Marshal Varus, what an honor." "Oh, no, no," said the old soldier, sitting down on the bench with the swift, precise movements of the fencing master. "You look well," he said, "but without really looking." "I look crippled, you mean?" "How are you, my old friend?" "I'm crippled, you pompous old ass." "And friend, is it? All those years since I came back and you have never sought me out, not once. Is that a friendship? Is that a friendship?" "Well enough, thank you, Lord Marshal." Varus shifted uncomfortably on the bench. "My latest student, Captain Luthar. Perhaps you know him. We are acquainted. You should see his forms." Varus shook his head sadly. "He has the talent, all right, though he will never be in your class, Sand. I don't know. I hope someday he'll be just as crippled as I am. But he has plenty of talent, enough to win. Only his wasting it, throwing it away. Oh, the tragedy of it. I am so upset I could be sick. Had I eaten anything this morning? He is lazy, Sand, and stubborn. He lacks courage. He lacks dedication. His heart is just not in it, and time is running out. I was wondering, if you have the time, of course." Varus looked Glokta in the eye for just an instant, "whether you might be able to speak to him for me." "I can hardly wait. Lecturing that whining ass would be the realization of all my dreams." "You arrogant old dolt. How dare you? You built your reputation on my successes. Then when I needed your help, you cut me off. And now you come to me and seek my help and call me friend. Of course, Marshal Varus, I would be glad to speak to him. Anything for an old friend." "Excellent, excellent. I'm sure you'll make all the difference. I train him every morning in that courtyard near the house of the Maker, where I used to train you." The old marshal trailed off awkwardly. "I will come as soon as my duties permit, of course your duties." Varus was already getting up, evidently keen to be on his way. Glokta held out his hand, making the old soldier pause for a moment. "You needn't worry, Lord Marshal, I am not contagious." Varus gave it a limp shake, as though worried it might snap off. Then he mumbled his excuses and strode away, head held high. The dripping soldiers bowed and saluted as he walked past, somewhat embarrassed. Glokta stretched out his leg, wondering whether to get up. And go where? The world will not end if I sit here a moment longer. There is no rush, no rush. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.